special edition of the Weekend Report with the Weekend Vigilante and Hagmann and Hagmann, teaming up for the September 13, 2014 broadcast. I'm your host, Sheila Zilinsky, and what a program tonight, folks. We have a hard-hitting show with two exceptional guests. You've heard my first guest on Alex+Jones and Coast to Coast AM. He's appeared on radio and TV programs around the globe. He has a Ph.D. in ecosystems analysis and climatology, and he led a multi-million-dollar research project in the 1990s in global warming. He is the leading expert on Agenda 21 and one of the most well-respected men in his field. He and his crew stopped the Convention on Biological Diversity from being ratified in the U.S. Senate. It is my distinct pleasure to have him back on, as he is simply one of my favorite guests who has worked tirelessly the last few decades. I could go on, but without further ado, Dr. Michael Coffman, welcome to the program. It's an honor.
Well, thank you, Sheila. I'm glad to be back on with you.
Well, Dr. Coffman, someday, honestly, when the historians are sifting through the ashes of what once was the Free West, trying to determine what happened, they will discover that freedom was hijacked by the Green Agenda. America is at war and doesn't even know it. A group of soulless, clandestine, self-proclaimed ruling oligarchs have literally reshaped the world into a state of complete totalitarianism. America's being pillaged and plundered. And speaking of that word plundered, your incredible book is entitled Plundered, How Progressive Ideology is Destroying America. And you really break this down. Give our listeners an overview of what's in this book and why it is so imperative that people understand this.
It's imperative for the purpose that we keep really re-electing people who are destroying, I don't care who it is in North America, either Canada or the United States, they're destroying our nations because of the progressive ideology is so far out in left field that for over 100 years, psychiatrists have been warning of this particular ideology not being connected to reality. And as a consequence, the policies that they developed are in outer space someplace. They do not work, and as a result, they are tearing our nations down and making us very, very vulnerable to an economic collapse.
In your book, Plundered, what I really think is so imperative, too, is you also describe how our education system has absolutely indoctrinated our kids for so many generations. They have no connection to the Constitution, liberty, or freedom. They never question the mainstream, which is permeated with this progressive ideology, and so they never find the truth, but rather they're just fed a steady diet of lies. They don't understand the precepts of liberty and wealth creation, and the two really go hand in hand, because the key to the free market system, it's really the reason why our founders set things up the way they did. And yet over the last few decades, we've seen this systematic attack on our property rights, in fact, the entire free market system, and essentially turn all our property rights over to the UN. And I don't think most of us understand how critically important property rights are and how that interconnects with our freedoms and liberties, wealth creation. You cannot create wealth without private property rights. I mean, it's basically the socialism that we're seeing in Europe right now that was started, back in the 18th century by Jean-Jacques Rousseau and his model of complete tyranny. Yet we see what has happened in Europe. When I read statements right out of the Agenda 21 protocol, like property ownership can result in social injustice, this is insane. Are you concerned about the deep level of anti-humanity underlying the environmental movement?
I really am. That's a very, very good point. I'm very interested and very concerned about the attack on private property rights because, as you said, you cannot create wealth. You cannot create a prosperous national economy or a prosperous family economy without private property rights. We can go into that in a little more detail if you want to, but the fact is you cannot do it without private property rights. Well-guaranteed legal private property rights that can be upheld in court. And this is what we're losing, because so many of the regulations and so many of the new laws that are coming out, I don't care what nation you're in, the fact is that they attack private property rights. In fact, that's the entire goal of Agenda 21, is you cannot implement Agenda 21, any part of Agenda 21, without denying people their private property rights, because Agenda 21 is predicated on the fact that you will, or the government will, control all private property rights. You can still pay taxes. You can still do things on your land or whatever the case may be. The property takes many different forms. But the key here is that you cannot develop wealth because the government will prohibit it. It definitely will. It's been shown time and time again that when the government takes over private property rights, you lose the effect of private property rights, the impact of private property rights.
Well, absolutely, and it's so interesting. I was just seeing articles in the mainstream about Obama now working to forge this sweeping international climate change agreement once again. You know, oh, you better cut your planet-warming fossil fuel emissions, but, of course, without ratification from Congress, right? I just find that it's amazing that when the radical red greenies come calling, boy, he acts immediately. I mean, he's going to shut down the coal mines, he'll shut down the steel mills, the commercial fisheries, the oil rigs, shut down industry and assembly lines. And I think, you know, when you really look at it, it's really about deindustrializing these hucksters have said this before, you know, Maurice Strong, isn't it our goal to deindustrialize the United States? I mean, that's pretty unbelievable, isn't it?
It really is, and that is their goal. And we need to understand that that's their goal. And that's where most of our well-paying middle-class jobs come from. He says he's the great leader for saving the middle class, but yet he is doing everything he can to destroy the middle class. And this is very concerning. I hope Americans wake up. They seem to be. Every poll that comes out shows that he has even less support on the part of the American people. As finally, the American people are catching on to the disastrous policies that he is implementing, and hopefully we'll reflect that here in the United States in the November elections in turnover Congress. And I don't really want to give control to the Republicans because the Republicans have that same disease for the most part, at least those who are in control of the Republican Party. And that doesn't make it any better as far as some of the policies that will come out in the ensuing 2 years before the next election in 2016. But the question is, can we survive if we keep the Senate in Democratic control, really saying progressive control, because there are very few senators that are Democratic senators that are not progressive. Most
Absolutely.
of them, about 95% of them are progressives. They basically destroyed the Democratic Party over the last 20 years. So if you're a Democrat and you think you're voting for the same philosophies and so forth that existed 20 years ago, you are in a sorry state, because it is radically different now under progressive control, because these people definitely want to destroy the United States. I don't know that they intentionally want to do that, but they are in the process of doing that because of their ideology. It's an ideology. It's a bankrupt ideology. It has never worked in the past. It will never work in the future. But unfortunately, one of the other problems with this ideology, as I explain in my book, Plundered, is that they can't see it. They are literally blind to their own weaknesses and their own deficits, and they will only tell you that the only reason it's not working is because of the Republicans are evil, or the George Bush is evil, or somebody else is evil. They will never, ever take responsibility for their own actions. And as a result of that, we are heading down a very, very destructive path.
Well, I agree, and I kind of thought as you were talking about the graffiti in Pompeii that says you get rid of this group of scoundrels, you'll just get another
Yes.
group. But, you know, speaking of never working in the past, I mean, what really concerns me is, again, the model of, you know, the social system, what it's done to Europe nations. I mean, this is unbelievable that this mentality really demonizes wealth creation. And, I mean, Rousseau was a piece of work. I mean, he was a 18th century Genevan philosopher, really the father of the French Revolution. He was certainly not a fan of Christianity, but more of a macabre apostate who believed all humanity was inherently evil. And I really think the most devilishly effective method being employed to carry out the totalitarian scheme really uses a piecemeal approach. And, I mean, it is aimed at destroying personal freedom, transferring national sovereignty to the United Nations. Think about eugenics huckster, good old Zbigniew Brzezinski, openly proposed world government in his 300-page book entitled Between Two Ages, and people can look that up. And his recommendations led to the formation of the Trilateral Commission, which he led for many years. And in the article, he lamented that a single leap into world government, which of course he preferred, wasn't attainable. So he urged an end run around national sovereignty and eroded it piece by piece. And he advocates this piecemeal transfer of power to the UN's International Monetary Fund. So, you've got the IMF, the UN's World Bank, the UN-led World Food Conference, and the Population Conference, and even a United Nations military arm. The end sought by this heavyweight huckster and his globalist pals would result in forced redistribution of the world's wealth. I mean, that is a termination of really your basic freedoms, your religion, your speech, your property rights, and that is a complete regimentation of all human activity right down to the local level. That is rather nefarious, isn't it?
It very much is. And remember, Brzezinski back in the 1990s, I think it was about 94, told the world that they now had the ability to change the culture of nations to what they wanted to do.
Right.
It's bizarre how he actually came out and actually said this. And the way they're doing it, of course, as you indicated earlier in the conversation, is through our public education system. The fact that as a nation, we have decided that God is not important enough to put into our school system. We have now little indoctrination centers all over the country that basically were planned. I have a document in my book, Plundered, details this as you go through it. It's called the B-Step program. It is really a dynamic program to introduce the socialist principles into our education system over a period of time, the Fabian philosophy, of course, over a period of time that will gradually change the way people think. And boy, has it been successful. And that is dangerous, and we're seeing the consequences. Because, as you indicated, there is no education anymore on our constitutional principles, why we had the Constitution, what our founding fathers stood for, and anything else. If anything about our founding fathers is in the new history books, it's basically that they were bad and evil men. That's really what you find in history books now. And they compare the constitutional form of government in the United States to that of the Soviet Union, in the glowing terms of what the Soviet Union has of trying to help people and so forth. It is so revised, such a great revision of history, that anyone who's graduating with these degrees, Common Core is just full of this stuff. When you graduate, you really believe the socialist dogma is what is best. And any time one of us comes along and says, no, it's evil and we need to use a constitutional form of government, they just either turn themselves off or they attack you or whatever the case might be. And unfortunately, they're able to get away with almost anything now in legislation, regulation, and so forth. And the American people are so dumbed down they cannot see it.
Well, you just nailed so many points. I mean, it's always really under the guise of the greater good because, after all, these megalomaniac hucksters, they think they know what's best, and how dare anybody speak out? You're either a Tea Party or you're a racist, and they really vilify everyone and demonize. I mean, the stuff you're talking about, even Common Core, don't get me started, that is the things nightmares are made of, but the Zilinsky playbook, but the bigger, it's really right out of the bowels of Marxism, and you're right, they write us off as these tinfoil hat kooks, but this is not Michael Coffman and Sheila Zilinsky saying these things. If you really step back and take a macro view, look at Prince Philip. Some of the quotes from these people are just absolutely staggering. If he could ever come back reincarnated, he would come back as a virus to wipe off the scourge that is humanity. Over and over you have these incredible statements. If you look at the World Wildlife Foundation and these other very nefarious organizations, and you have PETA heads saying humans are a cancer that should be eroded off the earth. This is not us saying it. These are very insidious people that we're dealing with.
Sheila, can I make one interruption or segue?
Yeah,
absolutely. You mentioned about the European situation. I want to really emphasize that particular point, and that is Europe is going down the tubes. There's just no question about it. It is probably a finished group as an assembled nations, and it's really ironic that they have a template for recovery right within the European area. I don't think they're in the European Union, but Sweden, just take Sweden for an example, or Estonia. Both of these nations used to be the most socialist nations in all of Europe. And back in the 1990s, they suddenly realized this isn't working. Some cooler heads begin to realize that, and they begin to change their economic model away from the Keynesian model to the Austrian model. Now, they're not there by any stretch of the imagination, but in the process, they have taken their nations out of the negative connotation of what's happening in Europe. In other words, they're going bankrupt, into a very positive, robust economy. Now, they're still influenced by all the other European nations, but Sweden now is light years ahead of all the other European nations in their economy because they're no longer using this Keynesian economic model that is so destructive that Obama has adopted for here in the United States that is equally destructive.
Well, that's absolutely true. Sweden has scrapped that, and you can see that, I mean, it just simply doesn't work. I heard a quote years ago from somebody who came out of socialism and even people that come out of communism say, why would we go back to systems that don't work? I mean, it's just absolutely incredible.
That always leads to the question, why are they doing it? Are they doing it because the ideology has blinded them, which I believe a lot of them are, or are they doing it deliberately to tear down their national economy in order to replace it with something else, as Zilinsky had advised back in the 1950s when he wrote his book? And we're seeing this happening all across the world right now, and you have to ask yourself your question, how much is deliberate and how much is just ideologically ignorant?
Well, I think when you step back and really take a macro view of everything and you start to really piece things together, I mean, one can only come to a logical conclusion that a lot of this stuff is absolutely orchestrated. There's no question. And I think that's the problem, is a lot of these ideologies that are interwoven into what we're seeing play out. Look at, for example, Obama's hand-picked science czar, John Holdren.
Yes.
These Malthusians are very much out of all the same school of thought, and then you interweave Zilinsky into that, who Obama, quite frankly, is a big proponent of that
Yes.
whole school of thought. These guys are all at the heart true Marxists, and now Karl Marx was a self-proclaimed Satanist, and I mean, this man is right straight out of the pit of hell.
Absolutely. I really believe it. And if you go down his, I think it's 10 or 12 points for Marxism, we are in every single one of them right now. And we're wondering why our economy is in a shambles, why we're a jobless nation, why all these things are going on. It's because we're accepting the socialist Marxist position that has never ever worked and never ever will work. And it's just tragic that people can't really see this. I don't know if it's because of the so-called conventional bias or the normalcy bias, as they call it. Nobody wants to have things change. They want it to be yesterday to be the same as today. Or if it's because we as a nation are under such a great delusion due to our educational biases that we just literally can't see it.
This cabal has taken the ultimate handle, the very air we breathe. And that's where we're going to get into the guts of Agenda 21. So
yes.
We're going to lay this out for people. Again, people have heard of Agenda 21. I know it raises some flags with people, yet other people, and in fact, I'm going to play a clip later in the show where I actually call out the Canadian Green Party leader who says, you know, it's a great document, but it's off the table. It's not being used. So this enormous document emerged from the 1992 Earth Summit in Rio de Janeiro, Brazil, and it's over 1,000 pages. It is really a plan for the 21st century, hence the name Agenda 21, and it lays out essentially a detailed program for social engineering on such a massive scale that it would be, if fully implemented, complete regimentation of all life on the planet. I mean, I am saying all life on planet Earth, appealing terms such as save the earth, biodiversity, sustainable development. Implementation of Agenda 21 at the local level also appears as smart growth initiatives, and a host of other titles employed, obviously, with the word green usually. But here's the interesting thing, Doctor, is Agenda 21 proposes an array of actions which are intended to be implemented by every person on Earth. So it calls for these specific changes in activities of all people. So essentially an effective execution of Agenda 21 would require this profound reorientation of all human society, unlike anything the world has ever experienced. So if a major enthusiast for Agenda 21 admits this comprehensive document calls for total regimentation of life on planet Earth, wouldn't people take notice of that? I mean, that's unbelievable. Weigh in on that.
Well, they should be saying that, but they're not saying that. What they're saying is that these plans will make communities healthy and robust, giving economic expansion and all the rest, along with living compatibly with nature. You know, all these very comfortable buzzwords that they use for the green ecology and the green economy and the green this and the green that really are as bankrupt as everything else that we've been talking about. But they're using these emotional-laden words or phrases to convince the citizens that this is the best thing since ice cream. Well, I got to ask you the question. If it's the best thing since ice cream, don't you think your forefathers, city councilmen, county commissioners, and all the rest that go along with it wouldn't have thought of these things decades, maybe 100 years ago, and started to implement them if they made sense? The reason they weren't implemented is because our city councilmen and so forth of yesteryear knew they would not work, because they had the education that taught them what happens when you start to socialize government in the way Agenda 21 does. And as a consequence, what we're seeing now is all these grand ideas across this country, and literally hundreds of millions of dollars are being spent by the Obama administration as carrots to get these communities to implement this through a program called Sustainable America. Now, what is Sustainable America? Sustainable America is the U.S. implementation of Agenda 21. It was published in 1996 with Bill Clinton as president, and basically does everything it can to support the various premises of Agenda 21. And this is the danger that we're seeing implemented, is that they had control over this. It actually started in the IUCN. It actually started in the Club of Rome back in the 1970s, but it wound up in the IUCN as the group to try to formalize this into a basic strategy called now Agenda 21 that will literally cause this transformation across the world. And the IUCN, the International Union for the Conservation of Nature, basically has all the governments around the world involved, including the EPA, our Army Corps of Engineers and Natural Resources, Agriculture. All of our organizations, our agencies here that deal with land management, are members of the IUCN, along with the Sierra Club, Nature Conservancy, NRDC, and other environmental organizations. There's 700 of them that get behind closed doors to develop this strategy. And literally it's being imposed on you and I, and you have no idea where it's coming from. It's coming from this collaboration, this unholy collaboration between our government agencies and our NGOs, our environmental NGOs, that have concocted this thing called Sustainable America, that we are now being given millions, hundreds of millions of dollars every year in order to implement it across America, given as grants and so forth in aid to counties or cities or whatever the case might be, that usually will create regional government. Now, what is regional government? That's when your various cities and your counties and so forth pool themselves into an overarching government without any electoral response or accountability to the people themselves. So you created a government agencies that create these tremendous, almost evil types of regulations to force you to do things that basically are unaccountable to the people they're doing it to, because there's no way to get them out of office. None. And as a consequence, if we continue to go down this path, it's going to be a disaster for this nation, because we will be under full tyranny within 15 or 20 years.
Well, I absolutely couldn't have articulated that better myself. And speaking of implementation, ICLEI is, of course, International Council for Local Environmental Initiatives, the acronym for ICLEI.
Yes.
They launched in 1990, and it's one of many NGOs operating in association with the United Nations. And ICLEI's website openly admits that its local Agenda 21 model communities program will aid local governments in implementing Chapter 28 of Agenda 21. This is essentially the actual action plan, and it's self-described as an association of over 1,200 local government members who are committed to sustainable development, and it seeks to swallow up a nation's independence by having these local governments adopt the overall Agenda 21 program. So a pattern emerges here of nations being too large to swallow in a single gulp, the Brzezinski piecemeal approach. But wouldn't it be fair to say that ICLEI was spawned by the UN to gain control over local governments one bite at a time?
I'm not so sure it was actually spawned by the United Nations as much as it was spawned by the international elite. This cobble of things that are actually controlling the United Nations in its activities and so forth. They have had this desire to be able to infiltrate. And in fact, this has been their modus operandi for many, many decades, is to infiltrate the ruling bodies, whatever they happen to be, in whatever country and so forth, and basically poison them into their way of thinking. And ICLEI is a perfect outgrowth or perfect expression of that. They knew that the Agenda 21 was coming out in 1992. There's been a few people in this country, myself included, that actually had a preview of Agenda 21 in the 1990s. We knew what was coming. And as a consequence, I began to develop an attack plan for the Convention on Biological Diversity, which I was able to stop on the U.S. Senate floor an hour before its cloture vote back in 1994 because I was prepared. And many of these other people have been too. And when you look at ICLEI, ICLEI is the perfect example of how they develop another arm of themselves to penetrate, and well-funded, don't get me wrong, they're well-funded, to penetrate into local governments, as you said. I mean, that's part of their name. And as a consequence, they bring these templates that all a county has to do or all the city has to do is basically take one of these templates, put their name on it, and they have a smart growth type of a plan for their county or city or whatever the case might be in their local government that basically follows Agenda 21 down to a T. And it's not until the local governments and the local people begin to realize what ICLEI is doing that they can begin to fight it. And there's been success. There's been, last I count I had was 60 or 70 cities or counties have actually withdrawn from ICLEI over the last year and a half. So headway is being made. It's probably more than that right now. And headway is being made, and we need to be aware of what's going on in our community, because there are literally hundreds of these communities in the United States that have invited ICLEI in to help them program their smart growth, which is very, very destructive.
Well, and not only is it destructive, and that was, very, very eloquently put, Agenda 21, folks, is really being advanced under an array of very deceptively labeled initiatives, such as cap and trade, global warming, climate control, population control, gun control, and even open borders and illegal immigration. Higher taxes, higher gas prices, refusal to drill for oil and natural gas, education, we talked about that, international IDs, health supplement control, food control, farming reform, control. I mean, there is just an endless plethora of things. And it's really interesting because Agenda 21 opponent Tom DeWeese, he's the Virginia-based leader of the American Policy Center, he talks about how ICLEI is hard at work while being financed by local tax revenues. And what amazes me is the fact that there's always these very benevolent agendas disguised as malevolent ones. I mean, after all, eco-friendly and sustainability, they sound nice until you scratch the surface of what's really going on, and you're forced out of the rural areas into these massive megacities complete with the stack and pack micro apartments, biking to work, herded around like cattle and governed by the Green Gestapo, the eco-police. I mean, when completed, this lifestyle would be hell on earth. Would you agree with that?
Oh, absolutely. They're talking about putting all families into basically less than a 900, sometimes 600 square foot apartment of someplace, very condensed apartments and so forth, where your population density is beyond any place that exists on Earth today. And this is what their plan is, to put you in these very small things, denying you private property rights, therefore the ability to live in single-family dwellings. And so that's years off. That's not going to happen immediately. But that is, if you look at their documentation, that is what their long-term goal is, stack and unpack them. 20-story high apartment buildings where you have literally tens of thousands of people residing in these little tiny dwellings. They have no compunction whatsoever to force you into these kinds of dwellings limit you on your ability to use your car, your automobile, or even public transportation eventually. They want you to use public transportation now, but eventually they want to restrict you so that you have to live in an area that has all of your needs supplied within walking distance, so you don't have to use any transportation whatsoever. This is the kind of thing that Agenda 21 is promoting, that is followed through with Sustainable America, and therefore all of these plans that the federal government is trying to implement by holding out this carrot of hundreds of millions of dollars, or millions of dollars at least, offering these communities to adopt these procedures.
Well, even the DHS had said we're going to be spying on you through your smart appliances. I mean,
yes.
The smart cars, the smart meters, these smartphones, everything is, hacked, attacked, and tracked. And, travel restriction is a big part of this, too. And you just touched on they want to obviously limit your travel. But think about all these IDs that are interlinked now, too. I mean, it's Big Brother everywhere. The biometric IDs are coming out. Everybody's passports and medical records and banking, everything's chipped and connected. And,
yes.
I mean, I don't think anybody can say they don't have a chipped card in their wallet. And these are just sort of the real beginnings of a very hellish system. And, when I hear the word smart technology and smart grid, smart growth, don't be fooled, folks. This is all a bigger piece of this very nefarious agenda, is it not?
Yes, it is. And it's all designed to basically destroy your Fourth Amendment rights of privacy. So much has happened in the last 30 years, especially the last 15 years, that people say, this NSA scandal and so forth, they say, so what? And I've known this for a long time, and there's nothing I could do about it, but the fact is that people are becoming basically immune to this. They just see it and say, so what? I mean, we know that's going on. It just has to happen. Every one of those things is an incremental loss of your liberty until one of the days we're going to wake up and realize we've lost our liberties. We won't have any left. The government will tell you what you can and cannot do, and that will be the end of it.
Well, 1984 is playing out more like a
yes.
newspaper than a dystopic novel from the 30s. But hey, Michael Coffman, if you don't have anything to hide, that statement boils my blood when people say, hey, what does it matter if everybody's getting spied on if you're not doing anything wrong? I mean, that is unbelievable, isn't it?
It really is. It really is. And that is a certain way to hurt us into a position where we can't do anything, because it'll all be out there in the open for these nosy bureaucrats to look at. And therefore, if there is a problem, and there will be, I can guarantee you it will be, that we will become a totalitarian government, and any effort to fight that totalitarian government is going to be stillborn, because they'll know what you're doing before you can do it.
A friend recently emailed me this article with a picture, and it says, I often wondered how Hitler arranged for the Nazis to do what they did, but he said, I'm watching my American friends, I'm watching this happen right now before my eyes. I mean, it's a slow, incremental,
yes.
It's like a desensitization, really. But the more ominous, insidious part of this really is, because, I mean, if you attend a Christian church, you're being taught to follow Gaia. You're being taught about sustainability from your preachers, and they've mixed in the Bible and the goals of the UN. The goal here is to end Christianity. These Gaians teach that the divine earth must be protected from all threats no matter what the cost. So in other words, you have less rights than a rock. United Nations Global Biodiversity Assessment, which obviously we'll talk more about how you stop that from being ratified in the Senate. But think about this, folks. Christianity as a faith really is the opposite of what this sacred Gaia worshipping Al Gore in his book Earth in the Balance actually echoes this view that prehistoric Europe and much of the world was based on this worship of a single earth goddess who assumed to be the fount of all life and radiated harmony and all that other garbage. And he goes on to really say that the last vestige of organized goddess worship was eliminated by Christianity. And then he quotes Desjardins, and the fate of mankind depends upon an emergence of a new faith in the future. So though Gore is fond of quoting, the earth is our mother, the earth is our mother, he's really saying that the earth does not belong to man. Man belongs to the earth. So Gaia worship is really at the heart of this global green agenda. It's really a very pagan environmental movement, and Mother Earth needs to remove the human infestation. It's a vile new form of paganism, really, isn't it?
Yes, it is. It goes back to the Old Testament pagan beliefs and so forth that Israel had to contend with at all times in those days. It's the same thing. It's just reborn now. And what is really alarming, if you don't really believe that, is that right in the IUCN itself, in a statement of purpose and so forth, back in the 1990s, and I have the webpage saved. It's not there anymore, but I had the webpage saved, where it said that the whole purpose of the IUCN was to lead the world into eco-spiritual practices and principles. Well, what's eco-spiritual? Well, it's exactly what you're talking about. It's the New Age concept, pantheistic concept of the reality of the world. And when you have embedded in your thought processes, your whole culture processes, the idea that you are nothing more than a microspeck on Earth, that really is, you belong to Earth, not the other way around, that you all of a sudden can do anything to anyone else if you can justify it by the fact that they're hurting Mother Earth. And that's exactly what Agenda 21 does. Until you realize that, until you realize that you're dealing with religious beliefs, because they won't write anything in that context, but you can read between the lines if you understand what pantheism is. Until you realize that you're dealing with a religion, we're not going to have much success, because we'll be putting out brush fires every place we go, which will just pop up someplace else. We have to get at the head, which is this New Age religion that believes that Gaia is Mother Earth, and as a consequence, anything that anyone does that hurts Mother Earth has got to be either eliminated or stopped.
Well, look at the movie Noah. If that isn't a Gaia-worshipping, occult, eco-pagan, neutral death cult, I don't know what is. That is a horrid movie. And you just nailed it when you said pantheism, because, and I'm telling you, Bible-believing Christians, of course, that's most of our audience, can be confident that humanity does not possess the power to destroy the earth, either gradually through man-made climate change or, through a sudden cataclysm such as a nuclear holocaust. God and only God holds the power to devastate the earth's environment, and the earth's future is entirely in his hands. And while these Gaia-loving occultists run around and claim climate crises, but think about this, folks. God commands his people, of course, to take care of the earth, but that's a far cry from considering the earth itself to be sacred, the source, of life in any way deserving our worship. I mean, this extreme environmentalism is really pagan idolatry.
It very much is. And as you said, the EPA is becoming the high priest of that idolatry here in the United States. It wants to expand its jurisdiction to almost every acre on the United States, so that every citizen of the United States is under the EPA jurisdiction through its water. And we could talk about that later, but the fact is that these agencies are trying to do everything they can to take over your life through creeping regulation or whatever it is that they can do to basically put the federal government in control of your life, which is exactly the opposite, of course, what our founders intended to be, the reverse, where the people control the government. It's really astonishing to realize that these people are not only pantheists, but many of them believe in reincarnation. Back when I stopped the Convention on Biological Diversity, there was a Ark of Hope that came in, which is a pattern after the Ark of the Covenant, biblical Ark of the Covenant. And on it were painted all kinds of figures and figurines, and they were obviously occult figures, showing the reincarnation, the wheel of life, and all the rest that is the central organizing principle of these people's ideas of reality. And as a result, what we're seeing coming out of the United Nations is nothing but a bunch of pantheistic ideals sent into law or treaties that basically control people's lives and prevent them from doing things that you would otherwise be allowed to do, because they believe you're hurting Mother Earth. And therefore, the incarnate, in other words, we're being reincarnated, we are losing that battle because we are destroying Mother Earth. We will no longer have the wheel of life because of our disastrous farming activities, logging activities, mining activities, you name it, that they believe is destroying Mother Earth and therefore the wheel of life.
3 years ago, my son came home and he brought with him this pledge of allegiance to, professing allegiance to Mother Earth. And I'll tell you, I went steaming into that school and I gave him a few history lessons. I mean, we see these documents, Canada's commitment to Earth worship, pumped out of the UN left, right, and center, the U.S.'s commitment to Earth worship. I mean, it is absolutely just mind-boggling. And I had Chris Horner, author of Red Hot Lies, on a few weeks ago, and we really got into the ominous EPA. But in short, it is literally, like you just said, becoming the high priest of the environment in America. And the ridiculous rules are hell-bent on what you just said, the complete deindustrialization of the U.S. I mean, come on, this isn't about the environment. The issue has never been about saving the environment, and people know that in their guts intrinsically. And the EPA, in my belief, honestly, Dr. Coffman, is one of the biggest threats we have today. I mean, it was created out of thin air. It was never ratified by Congress, and it needs to be wiped off the face of the earth, to be frank. We need to shut it down, and while we're at it, we might as well shut that UN down. It's really frustrating when the UN runs around masquerading itself as Grand Peace Central when we know well that it's true insidious intentions here. Would you agree with that?
Absolutely. There is no place for the EPA in the United States anymore. You cannot fix the EPA. It is so ingrained into their culture and so forth of lying, cheating, using pseudoscience or no science at all, that they cannot be convinced to change. I don't care what kind of pressure you bring against the EPA, how many people you fire, it will never, ever be brought under control. And as a consequence, it has to be eliminated. And we need to give that authority. I think all of us agree we need to have some regulations to prevent really stupid things from happening that have environmental consequences and so forth. But that should be done at the state level. And if a state like California gets out of order, in their zealousness, then people will start migrating to other states. But you can't have that when it happens over every state in the union, as it does with the EPA. And as a consequence, the EPA has to go with their authority turned back to the states, as it should have been according to the Constitution. Now, the other thing that I think is astonishing with the EPA and gives it justification, I'm writing an article on this right now. It'll be up on my website, americaplundered.com here probably next week, is basically that the EPA, back in 1987-88, hired a guy by the name of John Beale. Now, you remember every couple of years that the EPA comes out with these new NAAQS standards.
Right.
The air quality for ozone and particulate matter and so forth, that literally damage industry and so forth. It literally set it back on its heels, causing billions of dollars to have to go into reformatting and reinstituting these factories and so forth to make them compliant. The same thing with automobiles and all the rest. That's costing us over $1 trillion a year. That is costing us $1 trillion or over $1 trillion a year. And you know where those NAAQ standards came from? They came from nothing. They basically said that they're justified by several of these so-called scientific endeavors, none of which were actually peer-reviewed literature, and some of them were 20 to 30 years old at the time they were instituted back in the 1980s, the early 1990s, by a guy by the name of John Beale. Now, that name may strike a bell with you.
Yeah, it does.
Because remember back about a year ago, he was found guilty of conspiracy and so forth, claiming he was an agent of the CIA when he was actually working for the EPA. He's in prison now for 36 months for that. But what this man did, he was brilliant. Basically, was able to take these corrupt studies, which had no foundation in reality, and make them the centerpiece of all of his standards that he controlled totally. He was the gatekeeper. Nobody else had access to his science. No one else had access to what his reasoning was for creating this new standard that was going to wreak havoc with American industry and automobiles and so forth. And he basically, over a period of 10 years, implemented all of these new standards based on nothing, totally controlled, and he was working with environmental organizations like the NRDC and so forth, literally sitting down at the same table behind closed doors and creating this. They would create an agreement between the environmental organizations and the EPA that the environmental organizations would sue the EPA because they're not being stringent enough on some activity or something or other. Doesn't really matter. I mean, this is literally hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of times. Sue the EPA, within a matter of a couple of months, the EPA would acquiesce. They would give them huge legal fees. The EPA would give these organizations huge legal fees that they can then sue again, and the EPA would immediately implement a new standard because they were forced to by so-called legal system, even though it never really went to court.
Well, speaking of standard, you know, the IPCC, according to Obama, is the gold standard of international climate science. But the truth is it was set up in a fit of panic in 88 when people are actually gullible enough to be suckered into attributing warming to man. I mean, an article of faith among these neo-Malthusian greenies as the world is getting far too crowded and something's got to be done. You know, you've got Paul Ehrlich latching onto the Malthus doom scenario, and out came population bomb. And, you know, when you really look at it, it has very huge overtones of eugenics and depopulation. And, you know, think about people like Al Gore and James Hansen who raked in all these millions for being these resident alarmists, and then God knows how much more for their wisdom. You know, it's crazy ritzy vacations and big fortunes when you jump into bed with big ego, isn't it?
Yes, it is. It's literally amazing, as you just said, to see how these people can manipulate things that sound like they're trying to protect the environment, but all they're doing is putting money in their own pockets. Because
it's a money grab, really.
Gore got rich off of this stuff, and he was not doing it for the environment's sake. He was doing it for his own personal wealth creation.
Well, and thanks to Michael Mann, you know, his good old Al Gore endorsed school children scaring politician galvanizing hockey stick. I mean, what's appalling to me is when McIntyre and McKintrick tried to replicate that famous climatological reconstruction, it was stonewalled by Michael Mann at every single time that they put anything in it. I mean, this was a graph, people, that was so skewed that it produced a hockey stick more than 99% of the time, regardless of what data you fed into it. In other words, it was absolutely amazing. He would not turn anything over. And I guess the thing that really strikes me of all of it is you've got Obama churning out these lies that, the IPCC is this international climate science gold standard. But here's the problem with it. These people, these hucksters, look at the IPCC AR5. I mean, that has truly, Dr. Coffman, sunk to a level of hilarious incoherence. It's unbelievable that there hasn't been any warming in 17 years. And yet and Al Gore actually had the audacity to say to a group of students in Toronto, this is on record, global cooling, there's an easy explanation. It's caused by global warming. Yeah.
I know. You would think that people would have more intelligence to realize what he's trying to do. I mean, this is what is incredible. These people come out with these outrageous statements that just defy any kind of logic or reason whatsoever, and yet people will believe it. It's just beyond belief because it's in the New York Times or some other newspaper. Therefore, it's got to be official. Stop believing this garbage, folks. This pseudoscience is at worst, if it's not any science at all. It may not be any science at all in many cases. But the key thing is the fact that you're being led by the nose, and your education, to think your worldview is solid, you understand how the world works. If you're less than 50 years old or 40 years old especially, it's very, very likely that you have been indoctrinated and your worldview is way out of skew. And just accept it. I mean, we have been having a skewed education, and begin to start tracking down what the truth is on these issues, what the real solid science says. And the real solid science, because I have a minor in climatology, I have a Ph.D., and that real science shows that what you're seeing is a natural variation of Earth's temperatures that has been going on for hundreds of thousands of years, and basically you cannot find the reason why CO2 would cause what they're calling it to cause. If you want to go into the scientific details of that, we can do that. But the fact is that it's all garbage, and it's designed not to save the environment or not to save planet Earth. It's designed to control you and I, and to have this income redistribution around the world of the wealth of the United States to these third world nations who will squander it.
You're right. Control is really at the very core of this thing. And it's important for people to know that the UN has openly talked about world government for over a decade.
Yes.
And we've been, like you said earlier, we've been so dumbed down that anyone who brings up this concept is written off as a tinfoil hat conspiracy kook. But let's be clear, Agenda 21, folks, is full spectrum dominance over every area of people's lives, and I mean every area. You just said control. I mean, it controls your life in every way imaginable. Carol Quigley talked about it in Tragedy and Hope. There are 100-year-old banking cartel families who brought in the Federal Reserve, and cabal of collectivists will not stop until they achieve their grandiose vision of a new world order. And this Gaia worship is complete paganism. Alice Bailey, Theosophy, occultism, Luciferian connection, it's all interlinked, isn't it? This really is the stuff of nightmares, isn't it, Dr. Coffman?
It really is. It's right out of the pit of hell. And until we understand where it's coming from, we have to look. If you're still not convinced, look at the results of their policies, not the intricacies. They will blind you with all kinds of smoke and mirrors and so forth of these statistics and that statistics and so forth. But look at the results. Look at Europe. Look at what's happening in Europe. It's going down. It's going down in flames. We're not far behind because of the same policies. And until we understand that the results of this philosophy that is now taking hold of this country, in fact, has taken hold of it, is destructive and is destroying the United States, we're not going to be able to solve anything. We need to understand this so we can vote intelligently. And, folks, I would not vote. There are a few Democrats that I really like Manchin of West Virginia and so forth. These are the old blue dog. I may not agree with their policy decisions per se, but at least they want the betterment of the United States. Almost every other Democrat in Congress, I don't care if it's the House of Representatives or the Senate, wants to destroy the United States. Now, the Republicans are not far behind because most of them have a big idea that world government's really the way to go and all the rest, and they'll give mouth to small government and so forth. But we will watch their voting. They will vote for big government. They'll vote for war every time. They'll vote for a number of different things that are really part of this New Age kind of construct that we're talking about here in this. They may not actually believe in New Age stuff, but they are still going along with it because they see themselves in a greater position of power. Power is the ultimate aphrodisiac, not money. It's power.
You're right. Power is the ultimate thing, because this isn't about money. I mean, the Rockefellers, the Rothschilds, the who's who of the globalists, this is not about money because they have all the money they could ever want. It really is a diabolical Luciferian eugenics plan at the heart of it. When you really connect all the dots, it really is about depopulation. It's about eugenics. It's about this idea that people are plebs just using up the resources like Maurice Strong and Prince Phillips and all these PETA heads and other people have said that, man is a blight, a cancer that needs to be eroded. And that is really the mind of a megalomaniac sociopath, to say that humans are nothing more than useless eaters.
It really is. And we have sociopaths. They don't care about you and I. They could care less. And they will do things, and they will make these proclamations that this is horrible to have somebody beheaded and then 5 minutes later go off golfing. This is really, really a serious issue because they could care less about you. It all revolves around them. And what really is staggering is that this immigration thing, and Obama said that he was going to come out with these, pen on paper executive order here about now. And finally, I mean, that's something he really expected to be able to do because he really doesn't care about you and I. It's a power play on his part. It gets him what he wants. He could care less about the rest of us. And then finally, some of his Democrats finally convinced him that he had to back off on that. He didn't back off on it because it changed his mind. He backed off on it because, it was expedient to do so politically at this particular time, or he was going to even lose more power. So it's, I hate to say this, but we're run by a bunch of sociopaths.
Well, you're right, and what's really staggering, terrorists nowadays have more control, more territory, more weapons, and more money than they've ever had. Every day we're hearing about this ISIS situation. It's said they're now in America, and we've been unilaterally disarming against this enemy, and we're becoming isolated and abandoning our allies and leaving big chunks of the world open for these subhuman barbarians to get stronger, and our military is now so badly degraded while the enemy's on the rise. And when you step back here, we have fewer combat-ready soldiers since before World War I. We're abandoning our borders, and no one in government. It's amazing. You just talked about immigration. They're never securing the borders. The politicians simply will not build a secure system. And, hey, if you support a secure border and the deportation of people flooding in, you're a racist. Oh, you don't like Latinos? You must be a Tea Partier. Obama will not act. Got Chuck Hagel referring to ISIS as, again, I've said this on another show, it's a force and dimension that the world has never seen. But guess who armed them? Isn't it amazing that I honestly think Obama said, let me find the most stupidest guy on earth, and I'm going to make that Secretary of Defense, and the second stupidest guy ever, let me appoint him Secretary of State. It is just amazing, the grievous attacks that are going on every front. And I use the Steve Quayle term I love, America's being pillaged, plundered, and pilfered. And you can only really use pirate terms because you've got border chaos. I think I read, Dr. Coffman, there's like 375,000 pending immigration cases. They're ramming them through. The courts are in this chaotic backlog. This is just more fraudulent shenanigans by this imperial dictator.
It is. And my book, Plundered, basically goes into much of that. Now, it was written 2 years ago, so the recent developments haven't come, but I projected what was likely to happen, and it's happening right before our eyes. It really is amazing. You can predict what they're going to do next because you know the way they think. And if you know the way they think, you can actually begin to develop an offense. And that's how I started the fight against the ratification of the Convention on Biological Diversity. If I had waited until it was on the Senate floor, I would have never been able to do it. But at the time, I was aware of it. And I drew a map that basically showed what this means, that 1/2 of the United States would be off limits to human beings. That's what the treaty is designed to do. And as a result of this, you put this in map form, make these reserves and interconnecting corridors red, so it really stands out against the green background. When somebody sees it, it just sets them back on their hind end, because it is really shocking to see how much land they want. And I can do this because I have a Ph.D. in this. And I've been in every one of those ecoregions, so I know what the biology is. And so far, this was done back in the 1990s, and so far about 80 to 85% of my projections have been proven correct, because I could anticipate what they were going to do. And this map was blown up into a 4-by-6-foot poster taken out on the U.S. Senate floor, along with the documentation that I provided the Senate by K. Bailey Hutchinson of Texas at that time, and it literally shut the Senate down. They were ready to vote for a closer vote within 1 hour. George Mitchell was the Senate Majority Leader at the time. He's my senator here in Maine. We were able to communicate with him, and as a consequence, he revoked it. He actually took it off the Senate floor for a vote. Literally took it off the Senate floor for a vote. We came within 1 hour of literally putting 1/2 of the United States, eventually, it wasn't going to happen immediately, but eventually, into wilderness area. Now, since that time, of course, all these NGOs, these environmental NGOs, environmental agencies, federal agencies like the EPA, the Army Corps of Engineers, all the rest of it, have been systematically trying to implement it piecemeal, but it's really slowed them down. And as a consequence, what would have happened if it hadn't stopped that from being ratified? Folks, the United States would look a lot different today than it does.
Well, I shudder to think what would have happened if you had not stopped that from being ratified in the Senate. It's an understatement to say that was a sci-fi treaty, really. Look at the World Wildlife Federation. These are very nefarious NGOs, all masked, again, very benevolently, but these organizations are just a nightmare, aren't they?
They really are. And you have to wake up. Now, one of the things that I want to give some hope here, too. One of the things I have found is that the progressive movement itself is really made up of a very small part of the American population. I kind of estimate it's less than 8%, certainly less than 10%. The rest of those who are actually promoting the same agenda are liberals. I spit out liberals from progressives because I think there's a major difference. I found that in talking to them. You cannot convince a progressive of anything. He has got his mind, or she has got their mind made up. They're not going to change their mind for anything. All they need to do is to make it bigger, and it'll work. That's their solution to everything. So make it bigger, and it'll work. Whereas a liberal is liberal because of what they've been taught in school, and that probably names you in the listening audience if you consider yourself a liberal. That basically the reason why you think the way you think is because of what you've been taught in your public school system, or whatever school system you're in, which is usually public. But nonetheless, it's what you've been taught. Step back and think about this, because you are literally a rational individual. You can start to figure it out when you see that these things don't work. And almost none of the programs that Obama has put into place in these last 6 years are working. None of the programs that Europe has put into place are working. This whole green energy phenomenon is destroying Europe right now. I mean, literally destroying Europe, because it's making the price of energy so high that industry in Europe is fleeing, usually to the United States, because we have cheap energy still here. But nonetheless, all of it it's not worked out the way they dreamed. And we knew it wasn't going to work out, because electricity, or I should say wind power, doesn't work when the wind's not blowing, and it doesn't work in solar power when the sun isn't shining. And that's only about, the sun shines and the wind blows only about 25 to 30% of the time. And as a consequence, you have to have these things set up, massive acreage and so forth, set aside for this all across the country, in order to make up or to balance out the times when the wind's not blowing and the sun's not shining. And it doesn't work. It's extremely expensive. Solar energy is 33 times more expensive on a commercial basis than is natural gas that is now coming from wells and so forth that have been put across the country. Wind energy is about 12 times more expensive than natural gas. How can you possibly make up that deficit unless you start doubling and tripling the cost of energy to your customers? You can't. The only way that they're getting away with it right now is because of the huge federal subsidies that go into building these things, that now we're seeing only about half of what was originally guaranteed would happen. In other words, they said that solar energy would be 25 to 30 years. They're turning out to be 15 years. Wind energy was supposed to be 30 years. It's turning out to be about 12 years before the things start breaking down, and you have a lot of mechanical problems and so forth, and they have to be replaced. These things are going to only jack up the price.
Well, windmills and turbines are a big joke, and there's a reason they scrapped them in Europe. I mean, they're nothing more than bird choppers, really.
Yes.
You know, I absolutely just cringe when people talk about solar energy and wind power, because, again, it always sounds so eco-friendly, but people really don't, I don't think people really have a good grasp at,
they don't.
They just don't understand the tentacles of this thing, do they?
No, they don't. And the reason why they don't is because they always portray it in emotional context, to strike at your emotions. We have been taught, literally taught in school, to make decisions based on our emotions, not on rational data or information, not on things that can be proven one way or the other. And as a consequence, we can talk until we're blue in the face with proven science shows that this is absolutely the case, with green energy. And yet they will continue to support green energy because it's so emotionally pleasing. It sounds so wonderful. And it is destructive, and it will destroy any nation who tries to implement it, as our president is doing right now, because it's destroying Europe. They've had 13 years or so of this experience. They know that it won't work. And yet half of Europe, I wrote an article on this. You can find it on americaplundered.com under my op-ed section. It's worth reading. That in Europe, half of the population of Europe is still demanding that we continue the support of green energy in the various nations and so forth of Europe, because they will know it works. They just know it's going to work if they just made the program bigger. That's always the solution. Make it bigger. But when you're seeing that something does not work, and it's proven every way to Sunday in Europe that it's not working, they ignore the reality of the situation and still try to do it based on the emotion. I've never seen anything like it. It is stunning when you realize the psychological impact of what is really happening to these people.
This whole global warming religion's philosophical goal is to replace the Judeo-Christian religion, which made possible the great philosophical, religious, and economic and political foundations of Western civilization. And, especially like you said, pseudoscience, so you've got these college-educated leaders in politics and education and in business who have just absolutely rejected the, Christian faith and worldview. And in search of a new spiritual identity, that's where many have embraced the paganism of Gaia and the spirit of Earth. It's like it's the new religion for the new age. That's how I see it. It
really is. I agree with you wholeheartedly. It is basically the new age religion that's being imprinted on the world, not just Europe and the United States. It's taking time, but they have time, or at least they had time. I think people are starting to wake up now, and hopefully we'll start to reverse this whole process. And we'll start to see it, hopefully, in the U.S. with the November elections. I don't know when the next elections are in Canada. But you've got to look at your candidates. If they're true progressives, if they come off with these wild-haired policy decisions and so forth, they're probably progressives. Don't vote for them. Look at the results of what they have voted on in the past. Almost every time a progressive policy is put into place, either in legislation or regulation, it does not work. In fact, it's usually disastrous. But they cover that all over with smoke and mirrors and saying that, well, if you actually get down to the meat of the things, into the weeds, as we describe it very often, it will work because of this, this, and this, and this. And it sounds so good. I mean, it really does sound like it will work. But it doesn't, because they're violating very principles of human nature in the process.
I think it really comes down to it's not necessarily left or right, it's tyranny versus liberty. And, I think although most North Americans now realize that, government is corrupt and there's this bigger overarching globalist plan for a new world order, when we talk about Agenda 21 and its numerous tentacles, I think people are now waking up. I know they know it poses a danger to their communities and their nation, and many simply are not aware of it, but I think there is more and more people starting to wake up to the overall threat posed by Agenda 21 and other types of things. That we're talking about completely devastating loss of independence at the community, the county, the state, and national levels. Mm-hmm. I mean, these globalists plan on seizing control of the world, bit by bit, bite by bite, piece by piece, and it has to be blocked. And, here in Canada, and at the end of this interview, I'm going to play this 1-minute clip I took on our Green Party leader, who told me, again, that Agenda 21 is off the table, scrapped, abandoned. I guess what I can't believe is, does it amaze you at the lengths people will go to either spin doctor it as very good or, as in this case of the clip, deny its very existence?
It does. And for Obama 2 nights ago or 3 nights ago, whenever it was, that he gave his little speech and so forth, he proclaimed in no uncertain terms that ISIS was not Islam. It was not Islam. And I'm sitting there, we've written a book on Islam. Folks, ISIS is everything that the Quran envisions as Muslims should be. What we're seeing in most of the rest of the country, most of the rest of the world, are Muslims that are not very obedient to the Quran. ISIS is very obedient to the Quran.
Absolutely. It's 2 + 2 = 5, right? Because Obama says so.
That's right.
It is amazing what this the stuff that is churned out of this imperialist dictator's mouth is just. I don't even have any words to say how I feel about this anymore. I mean,
I know.
It's a bad Twilight episode some days. You just cannot believe. I can think of 30. Dr. Coffman, impeachable offenses alone for this guy to be charged for treason, and a lot of these other hucksters, and yet nobody goes to jail. Isn't that fascinating?
It really is. With all the scandals, no one has gone to jail for violating the constitutional rights of the American citizens in some form or another. are doing, setting up a situation where murder was involved or lying or whatever the case might be. No one has gone to jail. It's just shocking. And to be honest with you, I don't think anybody ever will, because they've been protected so much by this administration with false images, false testimony, false this, false that. It was amazing under the Benghazi thing when it first broke, the first 4 or 5 weeks. Everything that the administration came out with one day was disproven the next day, and yet it didn't seem to faze anyone that they were lying to us, bald-faced lies.
You know, well, remember John Brennan, he calling the caliphate a feckless delusion that's never going to happen. I mean, I played that clip. I mean, we're in a post-constitutional crisis. That's the bottom line. I mean, the Appointments Clause is under attack. The Commerce Clause is under attack. The First Amendment, the Second Amendment, the Fourth, the Fifth, the Ninth, the 10th, the 14th. I mean, the Treaty Clause. I mean, this is newsworthy, Dr. Coffman. When you have a president that's conducting himself as a despot, is that not just absolute the news of the century?
It really is. And yet it's being totally ignored by the mainstream media. And I don't know if the mainstream media is doing it deliberately because they know better, but they want to keep this guy because they want to see this nation destroyed, or if it's because they are also part of this progressive elite and want to bend the message the way they think it should be so that they can invoke the change that they want to see. I don't know what it is, if it's deliberate or ideological. It's just one or the other. It really doesn't matter because the results are the same.
Well, I always call CNN Clown News Network. I mean, these absolute phony fraud liberals and journalists out there, crickets chirping on the bigger issues, it's absolutely incredible how they spin doctor. So they'll essentially tell you what they want you to know. That's how it works. And, you know, people have to understand that all the media, whether it's newspaper, print, television, every inch of the media is controlled by these globalists. I mean, Rockefeller and the Rothschilds own 98% of all the media on the planet. I mean, isn't that staggering? It
is staggering, and it's why I think that they're having the success that they are, because most people still, if they even listen to the news at all or read a newspaper, they're reading a mainstream media outlet of some sort, or listening to or watching a mainstream media outlet of someone. And it's not that they are necessarily telling you the wrong thing. It's omission. They do not tell you what is really going on. As a consequence, you can't not put together the picture that you need to do to make a rational decision. And it is horrifying to realize how much of the mainstream media, if it was not for the alternative media and the Internet and radio programs like this one, actually bringing some alternative ideas. I'm not telling you to believe everything I say. I'm telling you to go investigate it yourself, and you will be shocked what you find. Because what you've been told by the mainstream media is nothing but a pack of lies.
It comes down to this. I mean, essentially, I mean, you've got a lot of people, face it, that are walking around in this dystopic trance, just singing Kumbaya while Rome burns around us. Does it shock you at the amount of people that are just absolutely in a trance?
It does. You know, I'm a Christian, and there's this so-called last days and so forth that the Bible talks about when there's going to be a great delusion. Now, I don't think we're in that great delusion, but we're sure seeing the beginnings of it, because the American people now are in a state of delusion like I could not believe. I literally could not believe, say, 10 years ago, that we would ever arrive in this position where most Americans are deluded. It's not just that they've been propagandized. Propagandizing effort has given them or put them in a state of delusion where they do not see reality. They do not see reality.
Well, and these silent devils in the pulpit. And, you know, then you've got the other side of the coin where, you know, I get into lots on my show how these mega church, they're just unscrupulous charlatans that are churning out a very lukewarm, dumbed-down, watered-down gospel. And I think that really judgment is at the door. I mean, I always say this nation is about to experience some very drastic changes in the near future. You talked about a delusion. You know, God is also not going to allow North America to go unchecked with its sin either.
Yes, that's correct. And if you want to see what we're doing to ourselves, again, my website, americaplundered.com, go to the op-eds, and down, maybe half or quarter of the way, there will be a series of articles. There's about 5 or 6 articles there. If you want to understand what's going on behind the scenes that you have no idea about unless you've been investigating yourself, it will shock you into the state of realism and understanding how much we're no longer at the edge of the cliff. We're way over the edge of the cliff, and the only thing that's holding us together, keeping our economy going from day to day, is this normalcy bias. You think that tomorrow's going to be the same as it was yesterday, and folks, it's about to end. It's really about to, and this isn't God doing this to us. We did it to ourselves.
Well, yeah, and even someone at the most virulent case of normalcy bias, they look around and they surely know that something is not right.
Yeah, I know more and more of them are finally realizing that. And really, we lost, I think, our best opportunity of correcting it. Not that I was much in favor of Mitt Romney in the 2012 elections here in the United States, but he at least had the background to begin to pull us out of that. Instead, we have the same old, except it's 10 times worse than it was in the first term. It's just unbelievable what this man is doing to destroy this country.
Well, people say Obama is failing miserably, and I quite laugh because he's doing exactly what he's told to do. I mean, he essentially is a puppet, and I really wonder if anybody ever gets in that's not pretty much giving their, puppeteer terms from the globalists, really. I think they're all puppets at the end of the day, and they're told what to do by these cabal of collectivists, really.
Oh, absolutely. With the possible exception of Ronald Reagan back in the 80s, almost every president since, in fact, I will say every president since, is being directed by this global cabal that you're talking about, and what they should do and what they shouldn't do. You cannot understand. I mean, you can look at Obama, what he has decided to do, say, with the pipeline, the XL pipeline. What in the world would ever prevent him from wanting to put that pipeline in to help the American people reduce its cost of oil and gasoline and so forth? You've got to be insane to block that, and yet he's blocking it. Why? Well, a lot of people say it was because of his environmental block. He's trying to appease them. Well, that's probably true to a degree. But no, he's really, really appeasing. In fact, the U.S. Senate report just came out this couple weeks ago showing how the billionaires who do not want to see us energy independent are blocking every effort they can that would cause us to go into an energy crisis. And as a consequence, what we're seeing here is Obama being obedient to that calling in order to actually realize that eventual end of a energy crisis. That's what he's striving for.
Well, I agree, and I want you to give out your website for people. I really recommend, folks, that you go to this site, and I vehemently recommend his book, Plundered, and also, I mean, there's such excellent information on this. Every single liberty-loving Christian should own this book, Plundered, and you have some other, like I said, incredible resources on your website. One of the things I love is, and I can't find them anywhere else, is you've got these little global warming fact sheets, and I've ordered tons of those. And so give out your website for our listeners, Dr. Coffman.
It's americaplundered.com, americaplundered.com. My company website is epi-us.com, epi-us.com. But the information that you're looking for is really found on the americaplundered.com.
Well, there's excellent resources. And on a final note, I'll tell you a little joke I heard. A Muslim, an illegal immigrant, and a Marxist walked into a bar, and the bartender says, "What'll it be, Mr. President?" Anyway, Dr. Coffman, it's such a pleasure to have you back on. Folks, you can go to weekendvigilante.com. On the front page there, Michael Coffman's information. It's linked up there on the website. Again, Michael, thank you so much for coming on. God bless you, Dr. Michael.
God bless you.
Stay tuned, and we'll catch you on the other side.
We're talking to Elizabeth May. Our number is 386-1161. You can email us at talk@cfax1070.com. Let's go to the phone lines and talk to Sheila. Sheila, you're on CFAX. Go ahead.
Hi, Elizabeth. This is Sheila Zilinsky with the Weekend Vigilante radio program, and I just heard you say that Agenda 21 is no longer in play. Could you give us more information about that?
Our second half, the Weekend Vigilante and the Hagmann and Hagmann Report. Sheila is with us, and our guest for this segment is Mr. Fritz Springmeier, former guest of the show, fantastic author. And Sheila, just before we get into this next interview, that was a fantastic interview with Michael Coffman. Great job.
Yeah, Dr. Coffman was such a trooper because he was sick as a dog, and yet he came on, so God bless him. Agenda 21 is a sci-fi, and what an incredible fight he's had against this cabal of sociopaths. And speaking of Barry Soetoro, Joe, did you hear Obama the other night say the Islamic State in the Levant is not Islamic? Hello, how does one even string those words together? That makes about as much sense as saying Burger King doesn't have burgers. And there's rumblings, and some of our insiders, as you know, have revealed that there's this Orwellian attempt to remove all radical Islam from the intelligence community. So, in other words, they're purging the term, the concept. You're not allowed to say radical Islam, Joe. And again, this is Caligula-level craziness. And I just wanted to, before we bring Fritz on, I wanted to say, did you see that picture of Barry where it looks like he has devil horns that has gone viral?
Absolutely, I saw that. And then that actually, I think, made the cover or on the front of Drudge and some other websites like the Washington Free Beacon. That was not by accident. These people that set up these press conferences and the backgrounds, they make sure that they know everything that's going to be in the shot and how the president's going to look where he's standing. They have to make sure they have their logos and all this other stuff in order. This could not have been by accident. And then we look at the 10 Arab Confederation of Nations that they put together, and you have to ask yourself, I heard on Rick Wiles on Friday, we talked about on Friday, is this something that is biblical that we're seeing?
Absolutely. Well, folks, our next guest is the highly acclaimed author, researcher, and prolific writer. He's an expert on the Illuminati. He's written incredible books on the Illuminati, stuff other people just have not touched. You really can't find this anywhere else, Joe. He's a West Point attendee. He is truly one of the progenitors of exposing the New World Order. I've had him on before, and I really enjoy this. So welcome to the program, Fritz Springmeier.
Can you hear me?
Absolutely.
Loud and clear.
Okay. Hello to you, and thanks for the opportunity to be on your show, and hello to all of the listeners.
Fritz, you were on Alex+Jones a few weeks ago, and that was a great job, by the way, on that. You know that I just saw an article where Katy Perry admits she is part of the Illuminati. You see Miley Cyrus and these other mind-control minions doing things like bragging about how their fans should follow the Illuminati on Twitter, and, it's million-plus zombies. They sport these shirts and jewelry with the Baphomet and other satanic symbology, and you've got this ubiquitous Illuminati pop culture craziness with symbolism everywhere. All these young kids today influenced by trendy Hollywood Illuminati pawns of the music and movie industry. And for years, the Illuminati has been sort of a nebulous clandestine group, yet now it appears more like a trendy club for the who's who of Hollywood, yet the real Illuminati is far from a joke. Fritz, give our listeners a 101, if you will. Walk us through what is the real Illuminati, who's involved, what's their objective, and how do they impact us presently?
Okay. Well, your question's really being addressed to that part of the audience that doesn't know what the Illuminati is already. And so in taking them into account, I'll try to not give just a one-sentence answer. But the Illuminati, you could say, the mother of all secret societies. It's the elite that goes genetically way back to the ancient world, ancient Mesopotamia, ancient Egypt, and their bloodlines, these powerful bloodlines, have come down through history. And sometimes they've kept themselves rather secret, so that the normal person wasn't tracking how they've been in control, but they're there. You can see them there coming down through the centuries. So it's these elite bloodlines, and from a Christian standpoint, we would call this Satan's hierarchy. Now, they themselves, being Gnostics, being into a type of paganism, would have a different view. They would view their leadership as being gods, as being spirits, as being aliens. So they would frame it differently. But those of us who have a Christian perspective, we know that the Word of God says that the God of this world is Satan, and his hierarchy is the Illuminati. They're the ones who are the owners of the Fed, the stockholders of the banks, and they used to be directly the stockholders of the Fed. They're the heads of the IMF. They're the key players in all these companies. A lot of Americans realize that corporate America are these huge corporations, a lot of them are multinational, control things, but who's controlling the corporations? And if you look really closely, you'll see it's an interlocking directorate. This one director of like Coca-Cola may be a director of 20 or 30 other major corporations, and there's not that many big corporations at the top. So when you start looking at who these people are, you see that they're a small in-group, and that's the Illuminati. I expose how they're connected, how they're genetically connected, how they connect as far as the interlocking directorates and so forth like that, and how they connect also on the level of being in the same fraternal organizations like Skull and Bones, or maybe they're 33rd degree Freemasons, or Scroll and Key, or something like this, or Council of Foreign Relations. So I show how they connect like that. And as far as their objectives, the head of the Illuminati has 22 things on his agenda, but just giving the top 3. Well, genocide is at the top of the list, and they want to take the world's population down significantly. The Georgia Stones there, it's written in stone, right there, that they're going to take the world's population down. And then in United States government is officially committed to population decrease. A lot of Americans may not realize that, but our government's legally committed to help this genocide, as many other governments are too. And then another thing that's on their agenda is the destruction of nationalism and the creation of a one-world government. And then a third item on there is the destruction of fundamentalism. What they want to replace, and what they're doing right now, is they want to replace the true Christianity with something that's more like Freemasonry. They call it. They say that the religion of the New World Order will be the Masonic religion. Well, what is the Masonic religion? Well, it's something that's namby-pamby, really. It's like paganism. See, I have to explain things a little bit here, but Christians have this concept that there's one truth, that there's an objective single truth. Excuse me. But when you get into paganism, you discover that it's like what they're teaching in our schools now. It's anything can be truth. It's this toleration. Of, well, if you believe it, that's okay. If you're good at what you believe, that's okay. And so paganism doesn't have a set of beliefs that you have to adhere to, because everything's relative and wishy-washy and mushy-mushy. So that's what we're looking at there is within Freemasonry, you can have anything you want as your God. I have a Masonic book that says that Christ is, well, to use the language, I don't know how to say it without saying it, but they say that Christ has come. He's just a bunch of sperm. And you can be a good Freemason and believe that, or you can be a good Freemason and believe that he's a doorknob or that he's a tree. And that's where we're headed, is where there isn't an objective truth.
Fritz.
Yeah, go ahead. I've spoken for quite a while. Let you guys speak.
Well, you said a lot, and it's very important. I've been reading a lot of books. There's the cult theology, religions of Rome, and going back to this, idea that the secret societies are really the Satanists or the Luciferians that are doing this. But we see this word Illuminati, and it's put out there on the internet and circulated historically that it refers to the Bavarian name of the Illuminati, founded in 1776, along with other secret societies that were outlawed by the Bavarian ruler Charles Theodore with encouragement from the Roman Catholic Church, and it permanently disbanded in 1785. But that's not too accurate, is it?
No. And the thing of it is the Bavarian Illuminati was not disbanded. In fact, a key book, there was a whole series of books written back then that were exposing the Illuminati. And one of the key ones, John Robeson, his book came out in 1798, and it was Proofs of a Conspiracy. It's a good book. And Robeson was one of the leading intelligent scientists of his day. He was very highly respected. So this is not someone who's a flake who exposed the Illuminati. For a while, he was a Freemason, and then he noticed that the Masonic lodges were being Illuminized, that the Illuminati were coming in and taking control of them, and he got out of the Masonic lodge, and then he exposed the Illuminati. Well, his books, written after 1795. So obviously, even right back then, people were concerned that it was still an ongoing issue. And there were other books, too, exposing the Illuminati right around the turn of the century. No, it didn't disband. In fact, one of the branches of the Bavarian Illuminati that we got here in the United States it's become better known to conspiracy students is the Skull and Bones. And there was a group that went in and managed to get into the tomb. They snuck in, they broke into it, and they went into a room that this room had walls with black velvet on it. It was a temple room, and there were words in German written up on the wall, and those words they didn't know what they meant, but when they got back out, they gave a report of what they had seen in there, those words in German are the words of the initiation of the Regent degree of the Bavarian Illuminati. So right there you see the proof that the Bavarian Illuminati continued even here in the United States. And the guy who started the Skull and Bones Order, he was William Huntington Russell. And one of the Illuminati bloodlines I exposed was the Russell family. And when he set up Skull and Bones, he called it Russell Trust. And he had been in Germany, and he had been, he was initiated over there into the Bavarian Illuminati and came over to Yale in 1832 and set up a branch. And there are 5 senior fraternal organizations there at Yale that, Skull and Bones being one of them, but the other 4, which came later, are modeled on it. And Scroll and Key, for instance, Book and Snake, they also are very similar. So, no, the Bavarian Illuminati continued, and in fact, Adam Weishaupt, and that's his pseudonym, but that was the name he took, Weishaupt. he left Bavaria, and he continued writing books on philosophy for years. So, no, the Bavarian Illuminati did not end there. And the Illuminati did not start in 1776 with the Bavarian Illuminati. The Bavarian Illuminati was a branch of these families that I'm talking about. And, one of the leading families today, the Van Dyne family, they intermarried with Weishaupt. And so, the Bavarian Illuminati was created by these Illuminati bloodlines as a branch, and then it's created other branches. So no, none of it stopped. But that's good disinformation for putting us off on the wrong track.
Okay. Another question here. Because these Luciferian generational bloodlines goes back to antiquity and stems back to Nimrod, these really are satanic families who position themselves in powerful positions to be able to control the world. And their calling card is a world order, which is deeply rooted in occultism. Can you get into that for us a little bit?
Well, the fundamental belief of the Illuminati hierarchy, they have two basic levels within the Illuminati. They have an anarchy level, and the anarchy level is all kinds of covens, all kinds of New Age groups, all kinds of fraternal organizations like the Skull and Bones, Scroll and Key. That's the anarchy level. And at the anarchy level, you don't see one single line of religious ritual. You have people doing all kinds of rituals and beliefs. But the hierarchy itself, which is another level, which has different levels to it, the hierarchy level has their grades and their initiations and their rituals. And those are what are best described as like a satanic Gnosticism. They believe that their good deeds have to balance their bad deeds. So one of the things that you'll notice about Illuminati kingpins is they're doing more good deeds than most of us because they're balancing their bad deeds with their good deeds. And a lot of times these Illuminati kingpins, if you go to Who's Who and you look up what their occupation is, it will say philanthropist. And it never ceases to amaze me to think of the concept that your occupation is philanthropist. Probably most of our listeners know what that is, but just in case there might be someone who doesn't know, philanthropist means that you spend your time giving away your money. Now, that's their occupation. And then I heard you say world order there. This world order, if we want a good understanding of it, surprisingly, one will get a good understanding of what this world order is all about if you go to the scriptures, if you go to the Word of God, and you start reading in Revelations, for instance, and it will start talking about a beast. It'll start talking about an antichrist. It'll start talking about a one world government. And it's pretty amazing how the prophecies of the Bible dovetail with what we have going on right now.
I absolutely agree with that. It isn't pretty incredible how prophecy is unfolding, isn't it?
Yes.
So I have a question, Fritz. William Van Duyn, the current head of the Illuminati this year, toasted the 60-year anniversary of Bilderberg meetings. The first Bilderberg meeting, for those that don't know, was back in 1954 in Holland, and creator and chairman of the Bilderbergs, Prince Bernhard of the Netherlands, was a card-carrying member of Hitler's SS, and he is seen in a rare photo at the Holland Hotel back in 54. And today the Bilderberg Group is still the same shadowy and secretive organization that it was in 54 when it was founded. For years, no one would admit its existence, and now they admit, oh yeah, it exists, but they've relegated it to nothing more than this think tank on global policy. But shockingly, William Van Duyn, the Illuminati head himself, actually sent you a copy of his speech. That's incredible. Was there anything in that speech that surprised you?
Not really. And it's not surprising me totally what's going on with them going from some secrecy to openness. I mean, this is relative. I mean, but it's been one of their things on their agenda has been to externalize themselves. And this goes back to what your original comments were, where you were talking about how it's become popular with the pop culture to do all these Illuminati signs, and the music and the movie industry is doing all the symbolism. Well, this is externalization of the hierarchy. That's one of Mr. Van Duyn's points that he's supposed to carry out. And one of his agendas is to take what was done in secret and externalize it. The other thing about the Bilderbergers is there's been some people that have just dogged, there's been 62 Bilderberg meetings, and there have been people that have just been working their really, really hard to figure out who was at the meetings, taking long distance photographs and getting a little piece here of the puzzle, a little piece there. And so for someone like myself who's been tracking them for a long time, I have such a good picture of the way things run that the whole idea of keeping it secret is kind of ludicrous. I know how they send out I know about the steering committee. This is all known beforehand, to people like myself who are researchers, about their steering committee of 13, which is all Illuminati, and then they'll send out invitations to guests, and then they'll send out topics for discussion so that the guests can study it. And what they're trying to do is they're trying to get a consensus. Every day they'll have 4 daily sessions, 2 in the morning, 2 in the afternoon, and they will have these pseudo debates about the discussions. But that's the way that they work on all different levels. And this was something I was exposing 25 years ago, how they do these things. They do the same thing in the PTA meetings. They want people to attend the PTA meetings, not because they're actually going to get input and change the agenda, but they want people to feel like they're part of the decision. And so these delegates to the Bilderberg meeting will then go back to all their separate countries, and they will implement the consensus that came up. So it made sense that rather than appear like they were plotting to blow up the World Trade Center or something like that, it made sense that the Bilderbergers just came out. They created their own website, and they put up some of this. Some of it they sent to me, and some of it was up on the BilderbergMeeting.org website. But it made sense that they took some of the heat off of themselves by just coming out and being a little bit more open. But still, I mean, there were still security. You know, they still didn't allow pictures taken. Nobody was at the hotel that they stayed at. You know, I mean, that got cleared out. You know, and the staff there were pledged to secrecy and stuff. So there was still some secrecy, but I think it was how to say this. If I had been in their shoes, what they did by being more open was a good tactic. It was calculated to take some heat off of them, because in the past it looked like they were sneaking around doing something nefarious, and most of what they discuss is not something sinister like blowing up the Hoover Dam or something like that, but it's more on the level of how do we deal with the Ukrainian situation, or who would be a good president for the United States in the next election, you know.
Well, it's pretty incredible. One of his statements was, "Today my speech will officially be published by our new enemy, the media." And he goes on to say, Bilderberg isn't a secret society, never was, perhaps in the eyes of the population, but what we did is we kept our topics and decisions to ourselves. We're not evil. I do not have an all-seeing eye. My ancestors only made sure the eye is on the U.S. dollar bill. I mean, it seems to me that this is very scripted, though, doesn't it?
Yeah, Mr. Van Dyne, who's the head of the Illuminati, how to put this where I'm being tactful, but the thing of it is there's certain things about the Illuminati that he honestly doesn't feel comfortable admitting, and
sure,
those are the kind of things like I think later on, maybe you may end up asking me about the mind control. The trauma-based mind control, boy, he's too sensitive about that to want any discussion on that. So he's willing to talk about the positive side of the Illuminati, but there's areas that are just they're too sensitive to him to admit. And I guess that's where, you know, like he was saying in that one, in his speech to the Bilderbergers, he referred to me as the enemy. And, you know, I guess that's where I come in, is I'm that balance there that is giving the truth about the Illuminati that's hard to take.
Well, I mean, certainly Bilderberg meetings are a tool of the Illuminati. And you touched on this a little bit, but I want you to explain for our listeners the difference between the Illuminati, the Freemasons, the Bilderberg Group, and the Skull and Bones, and how these umbrella organizations like the IMF, the Trilateral Commission, and the Council on Foreign Relations interconnect. Tie this all together for people, Fritz.
Okay. The Illuminati, until recent years, has been so nebulous that, in a way, when I first started exposing it, I would say it doesn't exist in the real world because it's so shadowy. And it also, if one understands the trauma-based mind control of the Illuminati, where they create an undetectable total mind-controlled slave that's a program multiple, the parts of the mind that are Illuminati don't hold the body every day. So what you see is not what you get. You've got a multiple personality, and the Illuminati parts may not come out but on ritual times or something. So the Illuminati has been really back in the shadows, and that being the case, then they need to work through organizations that are in existence. And what they've done is they set up semi-secret groups that they work through. So if you think of the Illuminati as the unseen hand, then Freemasonry would be the glove on that hand. And behind each of the organizations that they wanted to control, they would set up a shadow group that was semi-secret. So the Catholic Church is very visible, but behind the Catholic Church, you've got the Black Pope and the Jesuits. Or behind the Protestants, you've got Freemasonry. Because the leaders of Freemasonry, and that's what I exposed in my Be Wise as Serpents book, the leaders' denomination, I went denomination by denomination and showed how the leadership, especially Billy Graham and Schuller, Norman Vincent Peale, these guys are all 33rd degree Freemasons, you know. I spent a lot of time showing how Billy Graham was a Freemason because that's so shocking to people. So they work through, like Freemasonry is used now, the United Grand Lodge in London is used to send instructions to a lot of different religious organizations. So that's the Freemasons. Now, the Illuminati have a whole bunch of different things that if you're running the world, you've got to organize the structure somehow, and so they've broken it into 6 systems, and then some of those systems are broken into systems, and so like going from the macro, like one of those systems, like let's say you're talking about the political system, well then in each country they set up, and there's somewhat of a template. So like here in the United States, on U.S. policy, they have decision makers, executive committee of the Jason Group, key people, you know. Advisors to the president will be Illuminati advisors. You've got your key decision-making people. And then Mr. Van Dyne also will just give directives straight to somebody. So you have these key people pulling the puppet strings, but then they also have these organizations, because one person can't do all the thinking. So they have policy planning groups, Council of Foreign Relations, Trilateral Commission, Brookings Institute, Business Roundtable, Population Council, Urban Institute. These are all policy planning groups that the Illuminati created. If you look at who created the Council of Foreign Relations, Trilateral Commission, you know, like David Rockefeller. Rockefeller's his Illuminati bloodline. David Rockefeller has been one of the kings, one of the kingpins. He's been the head of the Rockefeller family. David Rockefeller was at this last Bilderberg meeting, by the way. He wasn't on the official membership list, but he attended quietly. So those policy planning groups will send their information. They'll be planning something for many years. They'll send their information on that will go to lawmakers. You know, you've got your congressional committees, executive agencies, and so forth. And then also another place that comes in is you've got research policy planning groups like the RAND Corporation, Stanford Research Institute, which is SRI, Hudson Institute. Those are also doing research, and the universities are also doing research, you know, the think tanks and the universities, and they're writing all this up. And they're writing the thing is with the Illuminati is their plans are long-term. You know, some of the plans we're having implemented now were made maybe 100 years ago. They've got 40-year plans, 20-year plans. They've even gotten a group, the Order of the Quest, which goes by several different names. And that group, the Order of the Quest, its job is to preserve the continuity of the plans from one generation to another. Now, there have been some changes. You know, the leadership in the Illuminati changed in 2009, and there were some major changes. But there's still been a lot of continuity to the agenda. You know, the big goal of wiping out a lot of us, genociding a lot of us, is still there. The other two goals I talked about, world government and the destruction of Christianity and other monotheistic faiths where the people are sincere, that's underway too. So going back to the question at hand, how do all these fit together? Well, the IMF it's got its specific role. And the head of the IMF, Christine Lagarde, is Illuminati. They shifted, like I say, in 2009, they went from having a council of 13, which was the advisory group. They went to a board of directors, which is similar. And Christine Lagarde sits on that board of directors. So she's right up there near the top. And she's head of IMF, and she's Illuminati. She's from France, by the way. The Trilateral Commission, its purpose, like I was saying, is a policy planning group, and it was designed to work in you had the Japanese and the Europeans and the Americans, and so they needed to harmonize the leadership and the policy planning of those three units. You know, Japan. And when I say Japan, a little bit broader than Japan, because you have the East Asia to some degree working with Japan, like Taiwan and Singapore, but basically Japan is the major thing there. You have that being worked in with the United States and the Europeans in the Trilateral Commission. So they're each serving a part of the whole mechanism. Council of Foreign Relations is very similar to Trilateral Commission, except it's been in existence much longer. And then if you go to other countries, you will see that they have the equivalent of the Council of Foreign Relations in England, in France, in Germany, in Russia. And so they've got their little template. And I'm not putting all the pieces there of this whole mechanism there for you, because there's a lot of interacting pieces that are working together. You've got your corporations, your banks, you've got your foundations, the courts. You know, they're all playing a different part in this, and then you got your intelligence agencies. They're being used. They're an important part because if anything today, especially, people are aware how important information is, and so the whole thing of having your intelligence agencies collecting information for you is very important. And then they can do it under the disguise of national security. So everybody will accept it.
And getting into the intelligence agencies, when people hear of MK Ultra and how the sinister CIA experiments done on people in the 50s and 60s involving drug electroshock therapy, who was it that said it was like a recipe for baking a cake, that there are many ingredients? And can you get into a little bit of how MK Ultra and mind control are used on people today through these intelligence agencies?
Yeah, that was in testimony being given before Congress, and that quote was mentioned in my formula book, The Illuminati Formula Used to Create an Undetectable Total Mind-Controlled Slave. It was a book I came out with that broke down all the different ingredients, methods that they use to create this mind control. And if I remembered what you asked right there, you were saying how is the you asked me to explain the mind control, and it's still going on today. Right now, one of the things that I've been dealing with is how the military, these top military generals, have some trauma-based mind-controlled slaves. They're called diamond children, blue diamond, red diamond queens. These diamond children are being used. These trauma-based mind control children are being used with these military generals. And that's the thing, is it's not just the intelligence agencies. This thing is widespread. It's being used in Hollywood. That's why the best way to understand this trauma-based mind control is that it's Illuminati, and that helps you understand that it's being used across the board in all sectors of society. The CIA program was called MK Ultra, and then the CIA says that they have quit MK Ultra, but I can verify that it's not stopped. They just do a sleight of hand, and they say, well, we stopped that program and then started under the auspices of something else. So the whole thing's continuing to go. And the way it works is you fracture the mind into thousands of pieces, disassociated pieces, and then the programmers create what's called now DID, which used to be called multiple personality disorder. I prefer the old name because I think that actually for most people is easier to really comprehend what's being described. They create multiple personalities. DID stands for dissociative identity disorder, which it kind of, in my opinion, for the common person, obfuscates it. But it is a disorder of dissociation. And it's used to create assassins. It's used to create sexual slaves. It's used to control politicians. It's used in so many vast different ways. In fact, one of the ways that it's used is in professional wrestling and some of your really hard contact sports where the athletes need to be dissociative. They use a lot of mind control slaves. And that also serves the purpose, and I know this is going to really upset a lot of people, probably towards me, not towards the reality, but they're going to be upset that I was the person that put the dirt clod in the punch bowl. But through athletes that are under mind control, they can actually change the outcome of these professional sports events. And at the very top, the Illuminati kingpins love to get into gambling and making money, and they know how they're going to throw a game and how they're going to change it slightly, and they do that. And if you know how betting is knowing that you're going to tamper or tweak something gives you a big advantage. So that's just one. It's like your previous with your previous guest right before me, and Sheila was going, these people have all the money they need. Yeah, they've got all the money they need, but that doesn't stop them from gambling and taking a unfair advantage over everybody else.
Yeah. You've covered a lot of ground here. When we, with so much of the disinformation and layers of this controlled matrix, how does a person discern what is true or not? And, we're inundated with information from the internet and the news, and so much of it is disinformation. There's even disinformation agents. In your opinion, Fritz, how do we wade through this mess of madness to get to the truth?
Wow. That is such an excellent question. So first I want to say that is a wonderful question. And first I want to go on record as saying, and again, I don't know that I have said this before, but a large share of the people out there exposing the New World Order are actually controlled opposition. When I first got started in the first few years, I was saying basically it's almost everybody out there, but there are a few legitimate people, but know that a lot of information that's being fed, even on our side of things, is just bogus. And when something sounds ridiculous, discard it. It's amazing some of the kind of crazy stuff that comes out of these people, and it's like, there's an old expression, first liar doesn't stand a chance. Well, it's like whoever can exaggerate more, it comes out with an exaggeration that even sounds better than the next person. And it seems like there's a certain group of people out there that they're thrill seekers. And so they listen, the Art Bell program was great at bringing on people that could really exaggerate some really crazy stuff. It didn't mean that everything that was on Art Bell was wrong. Don't get me wrong. He would also bring in people with good information, but they'll mix good information with a lot of craziness. And so one thing, and I really believe in the Word of God, and there's a lot of it's really popular out there nowadays to say that the Bible was just, it was created in the Middle Ages, it was this, it was that. They've got all this bogus popular disinformation about the Bible, and really what it is it's ancient wisdom that over thousands of years, key men, you select, maybe one man out of the century who was really close to God wrote something, and what he wrote gets put into the Bible. It's a select group of authors that were inspired, and they give this ancient wisdom. And the Word of God is amazing. It's got so much wisdom. And so I really would encourage people to, with the use of the Holy Spirit as a foundation, I think that the best place to start to get out of the muddled mess of madness that you referred to is to lay that foundation of the Scripture. There's a lot of truth in there that is just incredible truth. Go back and look at what Christ said. He said, whatsoever you do unto, do unto others what you would want done unto you. Well, you can find that teaching said by a lot of great sages around the world. It's very profound, the golden rule. That's just one thing that's in the Bible of many, many profound pieces of wisdom. So I think the foundation, no foundation can be laid than to lay the teachings of Christ and the Word of God. And from there, a person needs to, learning is a step-by-step process. It has been for me. I would do intense amount of research, and then I would get one step in place. And then once I got that step in place, I could go to the next step. So people need to take responsibility for what they know, and start waiting and start evaluating what people are saying, because that's their intention. Their intention is to give out so much information that it becomes so muddied that nobody can figure out what the heck's going on. And so your question is right on.
Well, and you'd have to have God's supernatural strength to do what you do, Fritz, because, you know, you mentioned starting this in the 1990s. You were covering these things when no one else was touching this stuff with a 10-foot pole, deep, dark, ominous things that nightmares are made of. What motivated you to get into this? Because, you know, I have to think, who would be motivated to get into this field? Because I wouldn't wish this calling on my worst nightmare. No person, I don't think, would ever pick this path personally. Talk about that.
Yes, exactly. Well, it was obedience to my calling by God. I felt very strongly that this was what God had called me to do, and I was moving forward in obedience. And there were many days when, yeah, it was like a nightmare, especially getting involved with, basically for a number of years, it was me alone against the Illuminati. It was not a warm, fuzzy feeling. It was definitely, it was a nightmare. True that. And, but it was very important. I knew what the Illuminati agenda is, and the things that they have on their agenda are so ominous that as a soldier, it's like if you're in battle and you know that your position is a key position to keep the enemy from winning the battle, you know, and overrunning you. It was like in World War II in Kasserine Pass. The Germans, for the first couple of days when Rommel hit the American troops, for the first couple of days they ran roughshod over the American army. And the American army was running. They were buggering out. They were fleeing. And there was a British unit of 10 tanks that was placed in Kasserine Pass. And they knew that if they didn't hold their position, the German army would just sweep through and annihilate the American army. And they just stood their ground, and, you know, they died, but they knew that it was important what they were doing. And I knew what I was doing was important. So what happened to me wasn't as important as for me to as a soldier in God's army, to hold my position.
Well, that's really good, because I like, you know, basically going from Uncle Sam's army to God's army. So, I mean, explain why leaving West Point. I mean, we all know West Point is a very super astute and affluent academy. You know, why that was significant for you when you're trying to present information and you're exposing the truth of the New World Order and this secret elite that are generational Satanists. I mean, does it ever surprise you the amount of denial and detachment there is, especially from Christians? Because in my experience, Fritz, it downright agitates pastors and church leaders. I don't know if it wreaks havoc on their dystopia. At least that's my experience. I don't imagine yours would be any different. Let's not disrupt this nice, warm, fuzzy little box of Christianity. Weigh in on that.
Okay, well, let's go back to, you first mentioned me going. I resigned from West Point. And I resigned from West Point because, like you were saying, I wanted to go from Uncle Sam's army to serving God, you know, God's army, as you put it. What West Point had taught me was total obedience. We only had four answers that we could say when we were questioned. Our four answers were yes, sir, no, excuse, sir, and sir, I do not understand. So if you were given a task to do, it didn't matter how impossible it was, and you got screamed in your face, why didn't you accomplish it? You only had one answer. No excuse, sir. And so you learned that if you had a responsibility, you carried it out. That's what the meaning of obedience is. So I wanted to take the one lesson that West Point had taught me, which was total obedience, and I wanted to apply that to God. And I wanted to see how that would operate if I came to God and obeyed him totally like I had been obeying my superiors at West Point. And when I reread the Bible, it was a totally different book when I read it with the idea of total obedience. And so that changed the way I approach things, and that's one reason why I ended up exposing the New World Order and all the rest of this. And that's part of the problem with the second part of what you were talking about, the nice, warm, fuzzy little thing. You see, Christianity is, well, going back to the soldier analogy, you have two different kinds of soldiers. You've got a parade ground soldier that can march around, that looks really nice, and he sleeps in a warm barracks, and he's got a comfortable life, and everybody thinks, oh, what a sharp-looking soldier. He's not a real soldier. He's a toy soldier. He's in front of the unknown tomb or something like that. But the real soldier, he's out in a foxhole, and he's in the trenches dirty, and he's bleeding, and he hasn't slept because the artillery continues to fire all night, and that's a real soldier. And so, what we see happening today is Christianity is really supposed to give the answers to the battles of life. It's to give us relief from reality. But what we have is they're giving relief from the world, but they're doing it by creating this warm, fuzzy, entertaining, nice place where you get away from reality and just relax here, but they're not giving relevant spiritual answers, and they're not giving intelligent answers to people. So when they have to really face real life, a lot of people fall away because they're unless life around them is warm and fuzzy, if they have to really face the storms of life, the churches haven't given them that the answers to face it. But that's not what Paul was about. If you read the Bible, you'll see that the Apostle Paul was giving us, and Christ too, Christ said, if they hated me, they're going to hate you, And he said, pick up your cross daily. So the real Christianity is that soldier, that real soldier out there in the trenches who's dirty and who's being shot at and who's uncomfortable, not the parade ground soldier that's walking around and got life easy.
Well, there's a price to pay for making a stand for God, certainly, but there's also a huge price to pay for what we do. Exposing secrets and things they don't want you to know here. Stanley Kubrick's film Eyes Wide Shut with Tom Cruise and his then-wife Nicole Kidman was said to be an expose of a hidden elite obsessed with dark, satanic sexual rites, pedophilia, and planned ritualistic transmutation of mankind. He dies very mysteriously halfway through his film. I think he simply exposed too much. But you yourself have experienced horrendous persecution. People ask me all the time, well, how is Fritz still alive? It's bad enough that you've come under horrendous fire and were even sent to federal prison for just shy of a decade for these trumped-up charges, by the very group working for those you were seeking to expose. Have you ever pondered your own mortality when it comes to your work, Fritz?
Well, Sheila, I live day by day, and there's been a number of situations where I could have been killed, and I have to give God the credit that I survived. When we go to, again, going back to the Word of God, we look at one of the heroines of the Bible, Esther, and she said, if I perish, if I perish. But she was willing to go forward and do what was right, you know. And the scriptures, like in the 23rd Psalm, it says, you know, I will fear no evil, you know, because there's this valley of the shadow of death, and so many of us have to go through that valley where we've got the shadow of death hanging for us, hanging over us. But so many people in the past, Paul, Christ, so many people before us, these great men of faith, went through that valley, and so we just have to plunge into the valley and say, you know, I count all loss for the excellency of the knowledge of Christ, and just, you know, just access our inner brave heart. And that's what I want the listeners to do, is to get in touch with their inner brave heart and to move forward in faith, you know, because it's faith that overcomes the world, and by extension, faith overcomes the New World Order.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with that. I just want to make sure Joe's still on with us.
Yeah, I'm still here, Sheila.
Okay.
Well, interesting. We were talking about the Bible and the kings of the earth conspiring against the things of God. We see that pride controls these charlatans in their megalomaniac lust power for the mocking God. We know that God will not be mocked. Christendom has been hijacked with a massive campaign to control the churches. Church money's getting their money through the Rockefeller Foundation and other groups. Can you tell us how much of an influence these secret societies have influenced the church as a body, as a unit in the public sphere?
Basically, total control. You know, it's and it's coming through a whole. When I tried to diagram out the control that the Illuminati have on the churches, it was coming from so many different angles, it was really hard to diagram. But there's a lot of foundational money being pumped into the big churches. There's a lot of Freemasons that are in the clergy. You know, the Southern Baptist Convention, which is the largest Protestant denomination, 65% of their clergy, their ministers, are Freemasons. And if you study Freemasonry like I have, you'll see that many Christians of the different denominations and many of the ministers have been Freemasons. And then if you look at the Masonic writings, they just out say that if you're a Masonic member, you're going to be used for the great plan. Well, what's the great plan? To bring in this one world government, you know? So there's just a lot of different ways that they influence the churches. That's a big discussion in itself, because you know, you have these within any local area that all the ministers will get together, and you have these secret groups of ministers getting together and saying, we have to protect each other, and if anybody's attacked, we have to come to and defend themselves. And there's so much on so many different levels, but for sure, one way or the other, whether it's through money or the seminaries and on, the most of Christendom is being controlled. And you can see that like when Billy Graham came to my area, which is the Portland area, there was only one church in Portland that did not participate in the Billy Graham crusade.
That's incredible.
Yeah, it really is. And are you surprised with the tolerance and the apathy, indifference, and the acceptance of evil today inside the churches and the body of Christ?
Well, you know, I heard you ask that question to the previous guest, and he said that he was surprised. But, you know, I have been a student of the Bible from the start, and there's two verses that stick in my mind. You go to 1 Timothy and you go to 2 Timothy, and in both books in the 4th chapter, there are verses that talk about this great apostasy. that in the latter times, people will depart from the faith, and they're going to give their lives over to deceiving spirits, right? Doctrines of demons, and then it says they're not going to listen to sound doctrine. They're going to turn their truth. They're going to turn their ears from the truth, and that is so true. Sheila and I both can testify. When you try to approach Christians, and this stuff's right there in the Bible, it's like you were making an allusion there to the kings of the earth, there in Psalms 2, it says that all the kings of the earth, they're all conspiring against God. It doesn't say the liberals or the progressives, and that's where I had a problem with your last guest, is he was like, well, just vote these people out. No, the voting's rigged, people, and if people need to get beyond this false dialectic of conservatives and liberals or progressives and liberals. No, they're controlling both sides. It's just like in the religious department, they're controlling all the different things on the menu. They're providing. You're going into the religion restaurant, and they're going to serve you whatever religion you want. So I'm not really surprised, because the scriptures warn us of this, and there's some other verses too that, especially like Revelations, but 1 John, 2nd chapter tells us about the Antichrist. So that we're given a heads up in the scriptures, and then a lot of other people have given us heads up too, besides the scriptures. So we should be, if we're not asleep, for whatever reason, I'm not really surprised, but that doesn't mean that I'm going to acquiesce to it.
Well, taking that a step further, the Bible is certainly very poignant when it comes to telling us the battle is between good and evil. And you once told me a story of a couple in a restaurant and what they concluded in that conversation, which I'd like you to talk about, because there's this widely held belief, Fritz, that, we're powerless to fight this evil, this corruption. How do we step back, focus on the desire to do noble things, love the truth, and fight this evil when we lay completely in the power of the wicked one here? Can we make a positive influence? And would you agree that, we're powerless to fight this?
That couple in the restaurant, this was back in the early 90s when people weren't so awake. The consciousness isn't as good as it is now. And they were discussing the New World Order for about 30 minutes, and I, like a little bird, was listening to this long discussion. I was quite surprised how well-informed both couples were, but all of a sudden one couple stood up and said, yeah, but you can't do anything about it, and they stormed out angry. And a lot of people have that. They have a saturation point where at a certain point they go, no more. I can't handle it anymore. In fact, somebody yesterday was saying the same thing. They were a Christian, and they said, I listen to this kind of radio show like we're doing, and they said, at a certain point, I understood what was going on, and I couldn't handle anymore because it was making me afraid. I never want people to be afraid, and I don't. What I want people to do is I want them to dig deeper. I want this to motivate them to come closer to Christ and the Spirit of God, because the Spirit of God, what does the Spirit of God give us? It gives us hope. It gives us truth. It gives us strength, and so it tells us in the Word of God, let us not be weary in well-doing. Let us not be weary in well-doing. Why? Because it says, for in due season we shall reap, if we faint not. So the thing of it is it's like running a marathon, If you didn't know that there was a finish line, you might go, man, I've had it. This is it. But because you know that there's a finish line, you persist. And that's the way we have to do. Don't faint, because if we don't faint, if we keep at it, we shall reap. And there's so many scriptures that are there to try to encourage us. It says, be of good courage, and he shall strengthen your heart. Think of that. And then again, it gave us the 23rd Psalm, where it's just being straight up front. Hey, there's this valley of the shadow of death. You're going to be fearing death when you go through this. The clouds of confusion and all the rest of dark things. Despairing clouds over this gloomy valley. But we just want to plunge in, and can we make a difference? Well, yes, we can, because God's our effectiveness. So oftentimes people get the cart before the horse, and what I mean by that is they ask me, well, can we win this? That's not the question. The question is what's the right thing to do? Let God be your effectiveness. Stand up and do what's right, and don't worry whether it's going to succeed or fail, but do what's right. It's like if you were going to go on a trip, do you say, oh, do I know 100% that I'm going to make it? No, nobody knows that they're going to make it. You might get a flat tire. You might run out of gas in the middle of Mojave Desert. Who knows? You don't know if you're going to make it or not, but you still start out on the trip, and so don't give yourself an impossible hurdle to cover, which is, will I succeed? Well, nobody knows but God. But go and do what's right, and that's what we have to do. And then, like I say, the Word of God tells us that if we're not weary in doing well, that in due season we will reap. So, we're given that encouragement by the Word of God. We're given promises that, He wants us to step forward and to continue to do what's right.
Well, earlier I was talking to Dr. Michael Coffman, and we were talking about this very, pantheistic, pagan kind of New Age religion that's kind of reemerged. And, I've actually had people that have emailed me, and Joe gets this, Doug gets this, come on, you Bible thumpers. The Bible's a dusty, irrelevant book of nice little fables and has nothing to do with today. It's a crutch. Fritz, I've heard pastors actually say to my face, these things, you can't take them literal. You and I did a show, something about the effect of, can you trust the Bible? I mean, it is staggering how historically accurate the Bible is, isn't it? And how do you respond to people that just, they really like your information, but come on, Fritz, the Bible, that dusty, irrelevant book of fables?
Well, I realize that there's a set of people out there like that. I don't know percentage-wise what it is. I have a lot of followers who are not Christians, and, that's their choice. God has given them the choice, and God has given them the choice to make those decisions, and likewise I do. But I know that that faith is what's going to overcome the New World Order. And you can't have faith unless you have God in your life. And what does having Christ and God in your life mean? It says, love not the world. So Christ was trying to teach us to separate ourselves from the world from the start. He's like the epitome of someone trying to warn us about the world. And so if these people don't like what they're seeing in the world, you would think that they would pay attention to Christ and His teachings, because Christ was very wise about trying to tear down the power structures of His day. He took on the corrupt. The Sanhedrin, the Pharisees had a different. They were like a congressman and a Supreme Court judge and a big minister and head of a denomination. They were very powerful people, And Christ took them on and, told them that their father was Satan. So, I don't know if I said that quote exactly just like I wanted, but Christ was teaching that friendship with the world is enmity to God, And if they're having a problem with this world system, it would seem to me like they would want to see what God has to say about it all.
Well, you have followers that follow you, and you just said they're not Christians. It's amazing. A lot of these so-called conspiracy theorists / awake people, they will acknowledge evil, but they won't acknowledge God. That just doesn't really make sense to me at all. They'll acknowledge there's this clandestine, group and sinister elites, but they won't actually acknowledge there's a God. It's just incredible to me.
Yeah, there's definitely some of that, and yet I have seen some people, because they've been following my research, I don't know how many, I don't think this is an exaggeration to say dozens of people have told me, Fritz, when I first became awake, I didn't believe in God, but I started following your research, and I began to realize that it's a battle between Christ and God and the dark side. They woke up to this war that's going on. That's really what it is. It's a war. And, I've been told by a lot of people, it's just your opinion that the Illuminati are satanic. No, I worked with people that I was bringing people out of the Illuminati that were in Illuminati rituals and had Illuminati programming. And believe me, their rituals and their programming were satanic. They worshiped a being called Satan and blah, blah, blah. It wasn't me putting my opinion on their life. That was what I was discovering. So there is this war between light and dark, between Christ and Satan, and people can acknowledge it, or they can just continue to putter along and not really realize what's all going on.
Well, and you mentioned something really interesting on this broadcast. I find this fascinating. You said that the Illuminati is controlling much of the churches, and that really is quite stunning when you really step back and kind of think about the implications of that. I mean, yes, we know that 501c3s are controlling it, and you're given the regulation and the rules, and you can't talk about abortion, and you can't talk about, you can't come out against homosexuality, and there's a lot of things you can't do. And it is a very politically correct church, don't offend anybody nowadays. But, is that all part of this programming to have people just sort of blindly adopting whatever? I mean, because anything goes now, it seems like, doesn't it?
Well, wow. The thing of it is they sent in people that called themselves Christians, and I mean, if you call yourself a Christian and you say the right Christian words, I'm born again and blah blah, who's going to doubt you? And so these people came in and started teaching things like visualization and some of these other occult things. They just gave the same things that was being done in witchcraft, they brought into the church under the disguise of positive thinking and some of these other things. So there's been an active campaign. They actively watch, and if there is a really genuine, good minister out there, you have to. One needs to understand the power that we're working against, this worldly power. They actually watch and see if there's a really dedicated Christian minister who's sold his soul to the Lord, and then they will go in and they will have some sweet little pretty bombshell seduce them or whatever it takes to derail that. There's an active campaign to destroy good, solid Christians. And of course, most of these good, solid Christians don't realize that because they haven't been they haven't been exposed to my kind of research, they don't realize what they're up against. It's like going into a basketball game and closing your ears and closing your eyes and not knowing what the opponent is doing, you know. And that's the way the Christian churches have been playing this game, is they don't have a clue what their enemy's trying to do. And I've tried to give the churches the battle plan and the information of how the enemy's working. For the last 25 years, I've tried to give them this information, but it's basically been rejected. So unless people are willing to open their eyes and open their ears and watch what the other team is doing, you're going to lose your game of basketball. You can't play a game of basketball blind. They're going to knock you over.
Well, that's really a good analogy about knocking you over. I think the most staggering thing I see within Christian community today, and I think this is just utterly sad, is that, you know, there is just such a, and again, I kind of touched on this in my question that I posed to you before. You know, I mean, it is staggering not only that the church is being controlled by these sinister groups, but I guess the other part is how indoctrinated the Christians are. I mean, for example, I very recently went to a meeting and they were having a Christian yoga session. I thought, you know, it's amazing how these little tentacles have crept into the, I mean, this is serious stuff, but it's always the benevolent masked and the malevolent. I mean, it's always, we're just doing it for exercise, we're just doing it for this. You know, there's so many people that just feel like, you know, the Bible is not being literal, Fritz. Come on, we've got to put our own spin on it. And it's not a smorgasbord of stuff you can pick and choose and, you know, sort of put your own ideologies on it. This is not a smorgasbord where you can just, I like what Pastor Langford says, you know, it's not a Burger King religion. You can't just order it your way. But it really is, it's incredibly inundated with all these other New Age kinds of things. Does that surprise you at all? Probably not.
Well, it saddens me because, you know, Sheila, there are really answers to life's problems in the Word of God, and the Holy Spirit working with the Word of God will solve our problems for us. And I watch what goes on in these churches, and the people are being given milk. You know, they're not being given, it's like sending somebody out to combat with a pop gun, you know, and it's not fair, and it saddens me because it doesn't have to be that way. Instead of teaching somebody the dynamics of spiritual dynamics of how to work with their son so that their son loves them and becomes a full, orbed, strong man in Christ, they're busy having potluck or doing a yoga class. And, you know, I'm not saying that I don't enjoy potlucks or that yoga isn't 100% evil. What I'm trying to say is that the mission of the church and what, you know, we're to disciple people. And we're not discipling people, and we're giving them a pop gun and giving them a pat on the back and telling them that the victory's already won, and then they go out there and they get hit with this tidal wave and knocked over, and they give up being a Christian. I've seen so many people give up being a Christian because they weren't given the ability to withstand what the world was going to throw at them, and it saddens me. The term I would use is makes me sad.
Well, it is a very sad situation indeed. And I think, you know, on a final note, as we get into the waning moments of the program, I mean, we're not fighting flesh and blood here, whether it's Illuminati, Bilderberg, Skull and Bones, you know, it's all really kind of under the auspices of just evil. And I mean, you're right, people are not getting fed. We're spiritually anemic, And I think there really does need to be a battle plan. I mean, knowing that we're not, fighting flesh and blood, what is a good battle plan? What is something that you would want our audience of Christians to know going forward into some very dark days ahead here?
One thing that was really helpful to me was Bill Gothard's Basic Youth Institute. And they used to be really big affairs, like they used to have them here in Portland in stadiums, and now they've dwindled down to, I think they're holding them in houses. But Basic Youth Institute goes through all of the type of major problems that a teenager is going to face, which are similar to all of us. That's one place that I would direct people. I would direct people to start reading their Bible for themselves, because a lot of times in these churches they never preach from Christ's words. I'm surprised how Christians, when I tell them a quote from Christ, they want to argue with me like it's not in the Bible or something. So I think people need to start reading their Bible for themselves, using the Holy Spirit. But before you're going to get this Holy Spirit on your side, you need to repent and clean your life up, which is not something that the churches are telling people. Because the churches are just like telling people, it doesn't matter what you do, you're saved. Once saved, always saved, it doesn't matter what you do, blah, blah. Yes, it does matter what you do, people. You're going to get out of fellowship with the Holy Spirit if you're going around doing all of this stuff, and then the Holy Spirit's not going to be there to direct you and to encourage and strengthen you.
Yeah, and you just hit on a very important point. And I know we're in the closing moments of the show, but the once saved, always saved. We're told in Peter, and we're told in other parts of the Bible, that people can fall out of righteousness. It says, it'd be better for those who have known the ways of righteousness to have never been born rather than fall back into the life of sin and turn away from God. This is an everyday battle we need to fight. It is a spiritual battle. We are fighting against our own human nature, our own human wants and lusts versus what the Lord has put out there for us, which is to fight to be a soldier in His army, as you have stated earlier. And if you can, just in the last moments here, speak to the daily task and what we need to do to work on our obedience, because we know it doesn't come natural to us. It is against our own humanity or our own human nature to do what the Lord says. What are some things you have done to increase, make sure you pray every day, make sure that you are focusing on the Lord rather than focusing on the world?
That's a very good question. Well, one thing is how to say it. We don't want to give in to the spirits of this world. We don't want to give in to spirits of depression. We don't want to give in to spirits of anger. There's a lot of spirits out there that, if they can, they'd like to take control of us. And how do we keep from grabbing onto those spirits? Well, for one, don't go where those spirits are going to be projected. Like, if you're watching television, you're soaking in all kinds of programming. And it's not just mental programming, it's also spiritual. You're taking in spirits. And the songs of the music industry, there are spirits attached to those. Rituals are done before those songs come out. Those bands have to give their lives to Satan before the world system's going to make them big. So we need to avoid the world. It's like that verse that I was quoting earlier, love not the things of the world. And if we pull back from the world, that right there is a big protection. When I was Amish, I noticed that just simply because the Amish stayed away from the mainstream world, they protected themselves from a lot. It was just amazing. Just common negative attitudes and disinformation that people would pick up just by taking the attitude of not loving the world, they protected themselves. So, granted, prayer is good, Bible reading is good, repentance is good, fellowshipping with other Christians is good. All of these things are fine in themselves, but every person's going to have to find out exactly what's going to work minute by minute for them. Really, and this is something that I've stressed many times over the years, but there's a verse that says, if you will humble yourself under the mighty hand of God, in his good time he will lift you up. And you don't hear humility preached in the churches hardly at all, but humility is, God resists the proud, and so if we want God to give us strength and be on our side, we have to humble ourselves. And what is humility? Well, one thing is it says Christ was humble. Christ wasn't humble because he denigrated himself and he badmouthed, oh, I'm not good, I'm ugly. That's not how he was humble. He was humble because he was obedient. So how are we obedient to God? We find out what are the gifts God has put in us, and then we use those gifts. And when we're using God's gifts that he's given us, like Sheila has the ability to come on, and same with you, Joe, you have this ability to be a host. And by doing that, then by using the gifts that God has given you, it builds you up, it strengthens you. It's like, you feel good because you're doing what you're good at. This is what God's called you to do. And humility is doing what God's called you to do.
Well, yeah, I agree with
Amen.
that. And absolutely incredible information tonight, Fritz. We want to thank you for coming back on. I want to encourage folks, if you have never read Fritz's book, get them. You can find his website linked at weekendvigilante.com. And, of course, it's pentracks.com. Your 13 Bloodlines of the Illuminati is really a must-have for every library, really. And, in fact, I was able to bring your books into quite a few libraries. So get your local library copy or order it in or order it off Fritz's website. Again, it's linked. And in addition to ordering copies, because there really is no one that has delved into the belly of the beast quite like you, Fritz. So, again, the website is linked on. And thank you so much for coming on tonight, Fritz.
Well, thank you, Sheila, and thank you, Joe, for having me on. Enjoyed being on. Enjoyed sharing what I could with the listeners. And God bless you all.
Well, thank you. And, Joe, I'd like to remind people that I'm asking for everyone to join me on a prayer call this Wednesday. The time and info is posted on my website. If you click on the tab, Sheila's Ministry, the drop-down menu will bring you to a weekly prayer tab. So I'm asking everyone to join me every Wednesday, and I'm actually fasting until sundown and praying for our nation, with whoever wants to join me in that fast and prayer, to pray for the persecuted Christians. And, I'll even take prayer requests. It's just essentially like a conference call, but for prayer. And we did this during the Million Man Fast and Prayer, and people joined with me. And, again, you don't have to be a prayer warrior, a prayer intercessor. This is simply open to all Bible-believing Christians who want to pray. And I urge you to do this with me, because never in the history of time has there been such an urgent need to prayer, quite frankly. So, again, go to my website for more information. And, folks, I want to send a shout-out to Rick Wiles. We need to be praying for Rick and his crew at True News. And also, please pray for the Pine Ridge Warriors, Brother Marcus and Curtis. And don't forget to join me on this prayer for, Wednesday, folks. I think it's important. And thank you to the audience for tuning in. Please support us, of course, with your prayers and your pesos, because, we want to stay on the air, so do what you can. And, again, bookmark weekendvigilante.com and send us your feedback. Joe, we love hearing from our audience, don't we?
Absolutely. We have such a great listening audience. They're very in tune and smart, and they understand what's going on. And, Sheila, I want to thank you for, once again, putting on a great show with great guests and great interviews. And thank you for what you do. We will be with you praying this Wednesday. And God bless you, and thank you to all the listeners. Everybody have a great night. We'll see you back here on Monday. Until then, stay safe. God bless. Thank you, Fritz. And thank you, Mr. Coffman. It was a great show.